Chapter 93, New diary page. Above the gray fog, gigantic stone columns held up a majestic divine hall. Two dark red blobs extended out into faint human figures by the side of the ancient mottled bronze table. "Good afternoon, Mr. Fool." Augmented with a blurry effect, Audrey greeted him with a bow and smiled. "It is unfortunate that there is no wine here, otherwise, we could have a toast to your successful trial." She was referring to the ritualistic magic. "You are more powerful than we imagined," Alger Wilson praised as well. Klein was surrounded by the thick fog as usual. He pressed down with his right arm and spoke with his normal tone, replying as though it was natural. "Great, this means that we are on the path of excellence. If you have any matters to tend to that leave you unable to attend the gathering on Mondays, conduct the ritual and inform me. All you have to do is change the line in the incantation, 'I pray for a good dream,' with the reason." "All right," Audrey quickly agreed. "Mr. Fool, I obtained another page of Emperor Roselle's diary. I believe I still owe you one page. I was away from land this week and haven't found any new pages." Alger placed his right hand near his chest and bowed in apology. "No matter. I expected my request to take a long time." Klein leaned back into his chair and tapped the armrest with his index finger. He looked at Miss Justice and said, "You can express the contents of the diary now." Audrey bowed slightly and said, "As you wish." A pen suddenly appeared before her. She recalled the symbols that she had memorized and tried her best to transcribe them. In seconds, she saw that the goatskin was already filled with content. The strange symbols neatly covered the entire page. After checking the contents, she put down the fountain pen and said, "It's done." Klein raised his hand and the goatskin parchment appeared in his palm. Shifting his gaze down, he started reading without emotion. July 9th. I suddenly thought of an interesting question. Since the sequence pathways are also called the blessings of the divinities or pathways of the divinities, then why would the stone slate that records the completed 22 sequence pathways be called the blasphemy slate? Blasphemy, what an interesting term. Just who is the one blasphemed? And who created the blasphemy slate? How could that person hold all of the sequence pathways? Just what other information was on the stone? I really want to see it. July 12th. I've realized another fact today. The sealed artifacts are an important component of a church's overall strength, even though some of the sealed items are very, very dangerous. Among the 7 churches, the god of craftsmanship wields the least number of sealed artifacts, which are also relatively less dangerous. Did I join an organization without a future? No, I should think of it this way: only a blank piece of paper can produce a good painting. A weak organization is the best place for me to display my abilities. July 14th. I saw that mysterious Mr. Zeradal again. I never expected him to be the leader of an ancient organization, the Secret Order. Klein's pupils constricted when he read this. He nearly revealed an unnatural expression. The Zeradal family only had a certain connection with the Secret Order in the notes of the Church of the Evernight Goddess. But now, he learned from Emperor Roselle that the mysterious Mr. Zeradal was further determined to be the leader of the Secret Order. From the looks of it, it is an unquestionable fact that the Secret Order holds the seer sequence pathway. While Klein was reading the diary, Audrey looked over and began observing him out of habit. However, her field of vision was completely obscured by the thick fog. Momentarily taken aback, Audrey snapped back to her senses and turned her head frantically to look at the other illusory dark red star. I was too reckless, too insolent, too foolish in trying to observe Mr. Fool. I was lucky that he isn't angry. Audrey stuck out her tongue secretly and pretended to admire the scenery. She was just short of humming a lively tune. Alger sat silently, his gaze never leaving the long bronze table. He knew his place, as if he was in the presence of a true god. Klein collected himself and scanned the last portion of the diary. After learning that I had become a savant, Mr. Zeradal mentioned that I had chosen a difficult, yet relatively safe path. I asked him why that was the case, but all he did was smile before telling me that the sequence pathway contains secrets beyond my imagination. I couldn't help but ask him which sequence pathway he selected. He told me that his sequence 9 was seer. I intentionally mocked him and asked if every seer only disclosed half-truths, never explaining things more clearly. Furthermore, he was clearly a powerful high-sequence beyonder. There was no need for him to continue acting as a seer. Mr. Zeradol told me that it was a habit he adopted from back when he was a seer, and that this was a method that could pique my curiosity and make me cooperate with him. He hoped that I could help him steal a dangerous sealed item from the Church of the God of Craftsmanship, a relic of the Antigonus family. Clearly, this must wait until I become a core member of the Church of the God of Craftsmanship. I asked Mr. Zeradol how long it would take to digest the potion if I used the acting method, and what standards I should use to determine if I had digested it completely. He told me that for the lower sequences, it would only take half a year to digest the potion as long as one strictly used the acting method. In fact, in the fastest case, it might only take a month. And standard measure for progress was simple: every beyonder would sense it immediately once the potion was completely digested. It is what it is. I asked him for more details, but he merely smiled at me. To hell with his smiles, I'll beat up every seer I see when I become a high-sequence beyonder. Rest in peace, Emperor. Klein read the diary several times before looking at Justice and the hanged man again. Sorry for the wait. It is our honor. Audrey was still shocked, forgetting that she was a spectator. She looked at the hanged man and organized her words. Where can I find the psychology alchemists? Psychology alchemists. Klein suddenly recalled the man buying supplementary ingredients for the spectator potion at the Tingen underground market. Perhaps he was a member of the psychology alchemists? Just as Klein was considering how to get closer to that man, the hanged man, Alger Wilson, shook his head and said, Miss Justice, firstly, I don't have a clue. Secondly, I don't think there's any rush in seeking out the psychology alchemists. What you should focus on now is completely digesting the spectator potion. Audrey glanced at the fool and noticed that he didn't have any intention of adding to the conversation. She nodded in disappointment and said, All I want is to have plenty of time to prepare so that I can approach them more naturally. All right, then when can I digest the spectator potion and stop acting? Is there a standard that indicates when I can? I'm almost at the point where I no longer feel frustrated, nor do I hear the constant murmuring anymore. Alger looked at the fool in the fog but saw that he didn't have any intention of speaking. He then deliberated before saying, If you don't use the acting method, the typical rule of thumb is to wait 3 years and confirm that you no longer feel restless or receive any auditory or visual illusions. There is one simple test to determine when you can. That method is to exhaust your body to its limit. If you still don't hear any maniacal murmurings or see any strange things at that point, that would mean that you're ready to advance. With regards to the acting method, I have also just come into contact with it. It feels good, so I don't think it'll take 3 years. That wasn't useful at all. 3 years, that's too long. Audrey criticized inwardly. She had just thought about this when she heard an armrest being tapped. Audrey froze, then turned her head in joy. She saw the fool tapping on the edge of the long table. Alger sat straighter, waiting for the fool to speak. Klein said in his normal tone, For low-sequence beyonders, as long as you strictly stick to acting, you should be able to digest the medicine in half a year. It's even possible to do it in a month. He looked at Justice and added, As for the signs of digestion, you'll know it when it comes. It doesn't need to be taught. 1 month. Great. Thank you, Mr. Fool. Audrey exclaimed while brimming with joy. Miss Justice, don't think that you are the chosen one. The key point is half a year. Klein lifted his right hand and placed it beside his lips. Half a year, Alger repeated softly. Audrey sensed joy, relief, and intense doubt in his tone. What is he suspicious about? Audrey thought as she asked, Mr. Fool, have you considered adding more members? Klein leaned back casually. He had long prepared an answer. This started as a trial, so I didn't spend much time thinking about extending our meetings. But now, as a regular gathering, we must choose our members carefully. Secrecy is our motto. Audrey nodded gently and said, that is to say that we have to follow a process of observation, recommendation, and testing process. Yes, a process. You can interpret it that way, Klein affirmed. In his mind he was thinking about how he could inquire about the secret order and the clown potion. How can I ask questions in a way that befits my status? Klein was placed in a difficult spot. At that moment, realizing that Justice temporarily had nothing else to say, Alger took the initiative to speak. I've heard that a listener from the Aurora Order is searching for traces of the true Creator, which is the holy residence they advocate. True Creator? Audrey asked, puzzled. It is an ancient entity worshipped by numerous secret organizations and cults. They believe that the Creator hasn't completely perished. The core he left behind is the true Creator. Alger gave a rough explanation. Since the fifth epoch, the true Creator has appeared in many forms, such as the Hanged Giant or the Eye behind the shadow curtains. Many people believe that Emperor Roselle referenced the imagery of the true Creator when he was creating the tarot cards, hence, there exists the card of the Hanged Man. At this point, he looked at Klein and said, Mr. Fool, there's nothing with what I said, right? Is he trying to probe for my views on the true Creator? Klein thought about the bloody man on the cross that the captain saw in Hannes Vincent's dream and immediately had an idea. Doesn't both the hanging and the shadows imply evil connotations? Therefore, he chuckled and said, I am more inclined to call him, the fallen Creator. Chapter 94, Hidden Sage, the Fallen Creator. Fallen, Alger ruminated over the fool's words and fell deep in thought. However, what struck Alger the most was the fool's relaxed, natural, and nonchalant attitude. He acted as if they were equal. If he hadn't experienced their previous ritual, Alger might have thought the fool was merely bluffing, and building himself up to intimidate him and Justice. But now, he was of the opinion that even if the fool was inferior to the true Creator, he was at least close to that level. It's dangerous. It's also an opportunity. Alger muttered softly. He then spoke with a smile, Mr. Fool, your description is indeed more appropriate. According to our observations, Beyonders who believed in the true Creator, the fallen Creator, have a higher probability of losing control. The rest of them are mostly psychopaths. That's something that the Nighthawk's intelligence mentioned as well. And the so-called psychopaths didn't lose their sanity, instead, their ideologies become twisted. Klein maintained his seated posture but didn't continue with the conversation. He was still considering how to inquire about the secret order and clown potion, but he couldn't figure out a way of asking the questions in a way that fit with his persona. It's such a pity that the gathering is still so different from an internet forum. Otherwise, I could create another Smuff account to join the gathering, and that account would be in charge of asking questions that are inconvenient for me to ask. Perhaps, one day, I'll learn mirror-related magic and give it a try. For example, I can make half the members here my Smuff accounts. There are 22 chairs here, and there are 22 cards in the tarot deck. That matches up perfectly. But when I created this divine hall, I didn't even name myself the Fool, or have any intention of forming at the tarot club. Do these symbolize the 22 different sequence pathways? I wanted a divine hall, so a divine hall appeared. If I wanted a Smuff account, would I get a Smuff account? Upon seeing the Fool remain silently engulfed in the thick gray fog, Audrey asked both wistfully and curiously, that sounds scary. Mr. Hanged Man, could you share, in detail, information about each and every mysterious organization? And also the matters regarding each secret cult? It's hard for me to come into contact with them during my daily life. I can only understand them through the both of you. I'm willing to pay for it. May I know what you'd like in return? That's a great question. Miss Justice, you're playing the role of my Smuff account to a certain extent. This way, the Hanged Man will definitely bring up the secret order. You're the best. Klein's mind stirred when he heard that, but he didn't let his emotions show through his expression or movements. Alger thought for a moment before saying, I need money, £1,000. It'd be best if they weren't bills marked by a serial number. Or maybe gemstones that have just been unearthed. Price them according to the Backlund Jewelry Exchange's monthly average price. £1,000? That's a huge sum of money. It could be used to buy a house in a high-class street in Tianjin City. Not everyone would have that available immediately. Captain might have an annual salary like that, I guess. Haley's death compensation was only £300. Although Miss Justice is a noble, she obviously hasn't inherited her family's wealth yet, and she'll only be receiving some sort of annual allowance. It's no wonder that the hanged man stated that it could be paid via gemstones. Klein was very sensitive towards monetary figures. Luckily, he was blanketed in thick fog. For a single lady or madam, £2,000 could let her live a decent life. If £2,000 were invested, the investment could reliably produce an annual return of about £100. £1,000? Audrey said, sounding shocked. She then replied happily, no problem, do I send it to the previous address? Judging by Miss Justice's tone, she finds it very cheap. Klein didn't look over. Alger was quiet for a good 20 seconds before he said, yes, send it to the Warrior and Amp, C Bar at Pelican Street, in the White Rose borough of Pritz Harbor. Tell the boss, Williams, that it's what the captain wants. All right. Audrey leaned back and posed in a spectator-like manner. Mr. Hanged Man, you can start now. Alger looked at the fool, deliberated for a moment before saying slowly, let's start from the Moses Ascetic Order. It is the earliest hidden organization. Of course, many think that the earliest hidden organizations are the Church of the Evernight Goddess, the Church of Mother Earth, and the Church of the God of Combat. These people must be from the Church of Lord of Storms, the Church of Eternal Blazing Sun, or the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom, Audrey refuted sulkily. The Church of the Goddess is the earliest hidden organization? That was the first time Klein had heard of such a claim. What exactly happened in the fourth epoch or the third epoch? Alger smiled and said, the truth is buried in ancient history. Only one thing is certain, no one has ever said that the Church of Lord of Storms, the Church of Eternal Blazing Sun, or the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom were once hidden organizations. Alright, let's save some time and return to main topic. The Moses Ascetic Order was first established by a few humans that had read the blasphemy slate. They believed in a non-anthropomorphic god, called the Hidden Sage. The description is that of a god, but it is more of an ideology, a natural law. For example, all objects are numeric. The Hidden Sage is an embodiment of spirit numerology. Or that knowledge is supreme, and the Hidden Sage is knowledge itself. Hence, the original Moses Ascetic Order was a very respectable organization, and it maintained a good relationship with the other major churches. The members of the organization led ascetic lives to resist losing control and to resolve the effects of the remnant potion. They strictly kept their order's secrets, and they upheld moral and religious precepts. They believe that humans continuously reincarnate after death. The sequence 9 that they grasp is called Mystery Prior. The word warlock was also spread from that organization. Audrey listened to the hanged man's description carefully and asked sharply, you said that the Moses Ascetic Order used to be a respectable organization. Are they not one anymore? Alger nodded his head indiscernibly. Yes, they have fallen into corruption and are now an evil organization. Why? I find their beliefs very good and very normal, Audrey expressed her confusion. That was Klein's confusion too. The information that he could get at his security clearance didn't provide the reason for the Moses Ascetic Order's fall from grace. Alger looked at the unfathomable fool and tersely agreed. I am not sure of the real reason. It might be because it has been buried by history. However, I have heard one terrifying explanation. In that story, the main reason why the Moses Ascetic Order fell into corruption was because the god that they believed in, the Hidden Sage, had come to life. He became the personification of an evil god. Came to life? How? Audrey found it unimaginable as she replied with an incredulous tone. Without realizing it, she had exited from her spectator state. It's like a horror story, but the ghost is even a god. Klein's heart stirred with a surge of emotions as well. I'm sorry, no one knows the answer. Alger had originally wanted to casually say, maybe Mr. Fool would know, but he held back the urge. He had already teetered on the borders of danger once. In the Book of Storms 5:7, there was a saying that Alger remembered clearly, which was, do not test God. Audrey calmed herself down and didn't press for more answers. She gestured for him to continue. Klein maintained his seated posture in his silence, validating the hanged man's descriptions with his own understanding. Finally, he realized that there were 4 points that he needed to take note of. First, the Demoness sect was also known as the Demoness family in the 4th epoch. Back then, they had very few members, and their beliefs were passed down through their bloodlines. Plus, they would kill the fathers of their children and abandon the baby boys. Hence, all the members were female. Of course, that was all from Alger's description, and there was no way to verify it at the moment. Second, the numinous episcopate that believed in death and the Rose school of thought that liked bloody sacrificial worship ceremonies both originated in the southern continent. After the colonial era came, they almost vanished under attacks by the 7 churches. But as such, they began spreading to the northern continent. Third, the current psychology alchemists was similar to the earlier Moses ascetic order. They believed in a non-anthropomorphic existence and believed that the human spirit could change everything. Fourth, the secret order had the lowest activity level among all the other hidden organizations. Thus, they were the most unknown. Every time they appeared, they seemed to be after something or looking for something. What are they after or looking for? Klein suddenly recalled the diary which he had read earlier. The leader of the secret order, Zeradal, cooperated with the Roselle. His goal was to get something left behind by the Antigonus family. Their appearance that time was to look for the lost notebook, the Antigonus family notebook. Klein narrowed his eyes slightly and felt that he had apparently found the key reason for the secret order's actions. They are after the things that the Antigonus family left behind. Klein suppressed his urge to tap the edge of the table as his thoughts appeared one after another. Oh, they were looking for remnant traces the Antigonus family left behind? Then must I direct my focus onto these areas to obtain the clown potion formula from the secret order? After a further exchange of information, Klein announced the end of the gathering. By your will. Audrey and Alger stood up together. Cutting off the connections, he saw both their figures shatter and disappear. Klein rubbed his glabella and attempted conjuring a smuff account with his mind. As he thought, a figure appeared at the furthest end of the long bronze table. That figure was wearing a black tuxedo, a silk top hat, and a dull expression. His actions were clumsy and inarticulate. Even though he was engulfed in gray fog, it was obvious that something was wrong with him. That won't do. Klein experimented a few more times before sighing and dismissing the idea of creating a smuff account. He attempted other things too. He continued to sit above the gray fog in the seat of honor at the long bronze table. He considered what Audrey had said, and he cast his gaze curiously at the illusory crimson stars. After a moment of silence, Klein started to pray as a form of feedback instead of establishing contact with those stars. Amidst the tranquility and silence, he didn't receive any feedback from the 10+ crimson stars nearby. In order to receive feedback, I need to pull someone above the gray fog before I can reply? Klein nodded as he thought, feeling somewhat disappointed. He didn't want to violate someone else's will and forcefully pull them into this mysterious space. Klein was just getting ready to leave, but he habitually touched a nearby illusory crimson star. Just then, he suddenly felt that there was a faint and insignificant prayer deep inside the crimson star. Chapter 95, The Supplicant, a Prayer? Klein's mind stirred as he used the same method he used back when he spied on the hanged man. He allowed his spirituality to spread outward and touch the crimson blob. A hazy and contorted image appeared within his sight. He could faintly see a blonde teen kneeling on the ground, facing a pure crystal ball. That teenager was dressed in a tight-fitting black outfit, with a style very different from the contemporary styles of the Lone Kingdom. It was more congruent with the traditional clothing of the Faisak Empire and the Indus Republic that Klein had seen from reading magazines. The area surrounding the teenager was dark and had old furniture. From time to time, the room would be illuminated, but Klein couldn't hear the roaring thunder or the pattering of rain. In the image, the teenager had his hands on his forehead, fingers crossed. He bowed forward, continually praying for something. His thick accent buzzed in Klein's ears. Klein listened attentively but discovered an awkward fact. He couldn't understand what the other party was saying. It was a language that he had never come across in his life. To think that I cannot understand a foreign language even though I am the mysterious ruler of this world above the gray fog. Klein gave a self-deprecating laugh. He indignantly tried listening in once again in a manner more attentive than when he had to do English listening comprehension tests back on Earth. As he was listening to the prayers, he gradually discovered something. Even though he had never learned the language the young man was speaking, he found that it had similarities to ancient Faisak. Father. Mother. Those are likely the meanings of those two terms, right? It is quite similar to ancient Faisak, but not without its differences. Klein creased his brows and slipped into deep thought. Ancient Faisak was a common language in the Fourth Epoch. It is also the root language of all the contemporary languages of this era. Furthermore, it is still evolving. I cannot confirm it right now. He listened to it over and over again, eliminating the possibility of the language being a modern language like Lone, Faisak, or Intis. Could it be a dialect of ancient Faisak? Like the language used in the Antigonus family's diary? Klein tapped his finger on the edge of the bronze table and nodded indiscernibly. There was another possibility. Ancient Faisak didn't spring into existence out of nothing, it was an evolution of Jotun, the language of the giants. The Faisak Empire in the north has always claimed that its people possesses the bloodline of the giants. Perhaps, this is ancient Jotun. At this point, Klein, who lacked knowledge, could only stop. He retracted his spirituality, without looking or listening into that scene. He had no intention of pulling the praying teen up above the fog immediately. He wanted to know what the young man was talking about first. Of course, before that, he had to observe him frequently and conduct basic tests. Phew. Klein exhaled as he leaned back in his chair. He enveloped himself with his spirituality and simulated the feeling of falling. After revising Roselle's diary, Klein changed into his formal wear and left for the divination club. He took the public transport despite his pay rise, but he did splurge to support Mrs. Wendy's business. He spent 5 pence on sweet iced tea to combat the afternoon heat. When he arrived at House Street, Klein tossed the empty cup into the trash can and walked up to the second floor. Before entering the building, he pinched his glabella and activated his spirit vision. Klein had just entered the hall when he felt a faint, lingering grief. The pretty receptionist Angelica was sitting there, her slightly red eyes looked unfocused. The grief will pass in time, Klein said with a gentle and firm tone as he walked toward Angelica. Angelica looked up abruptly and muttered, clearly confused, "Mr. Moretti." She quickly came to her senses and asked, perturbed, "Why, you already know about Mr. Vincent?" "Oh right, I forgot that you're an exceptional fortune teller." Klein sighed appropriately. "I only managed to divine a very rough outline of what transpired." "Just what exactly happened to Mr. Vincent?" "The boss told us that Mr. Vincent had a heart attack in his sleep and left this world peacefully." Angelica cried as she said, "He was so friendly, so polite, a true gentleman. He was the spiritual mentor of so many of our members. He was still so young. I am sorry for bringing up this sad topic." Klein didn't console her any further. He walked toward the meeting room slowly. Angelica took out a handkerchief and wiped her eyes and nose. She then looked at Klein's back and asked loudly, "Mr. Moretti, what would you like to drink?" "Black tea." Klein preferred black tea to coffee, even though he found the black tea average. In comparison, he preferred ginger beer and sweet iced tea. But as a gentleman, it was not right for him to act like a child in a formal setting. As it was a Monday, there were only 5 or 6 members in the meeting room. Using his spirit vision, Klein saw that they each had different colors of emotion. Some were grieving, some more dull, some relatively unaffected. They're all rather normal reactions. Klein nodded slightly. He picked up his cane and found a spot in the room. He was about to deactivate his spirit vision when he saw Angelica walk in and walk towards him. "Mr. Moretti, a customer is looking for you." "Well, it's the person from last time," the beautiful lady said with a hushed tone. "You still remember him?" Klein asked with a smile. I wonder if he bought the magical medicine as I instructed. I wonder if he still needs surgery." Angelica covered her mouth and said, "He was the only person who was willing to wait an entire afternoon in the club for a divination." Klein grabbed his cane and stood up. He walked outside without saying anything. In the reception area, he found the person who had sought his services the other day. He also noticed that the aura near his liver had regained its normal color. His overall health had also improved. "Congratulations, the feeling of being healthy is wonderful indeed." Klein smiled as he extended a hand. Bogda was first taken aback before he immediately extended both hands. He grabbed Klein's right palm tightly. "Mr. Moretti, you truly can see my condition." "Yes, I have fully recovered. The doctors asked me questions over and over again, ran repeated tests on me, but they cannot believe that I recovered just like that." Upon hearing Bogda's ecstatic description, Klein calmly confirmed one thing: the apothecary at Lawson's folk herb store was definitely a beyonder. He had seen how severe the man's liver disease had been. Fully healing him in the span of a few days was beyond the capability of herbs and medical ability. The only possible explanation was that of a beyonder. Coupled with the incident with Glassy, there could only be one answer. "I have to repent to God. To think that I would suspect that miraculous doctor." Bogda refused to let go of Klein's hand. He continued on about his shame and gratitude. "Those £10 were truly money well spent. It bought my life back." "What? £10? You spent £10 on the miraculous medicine? And you only gave me 8 pence for my divination." "Just 8 pence, 8 pence. Klein was dazed just hearing about it. At this moment, Bogda released his hands as he took a step back while beaming. He bowed reverently and said, "I am here today to express my gratitude. Thank you, Master Moretti. You showed me the way and saved my life. This was the outcome of you paying to have something divined. You need not thank anybody." Klein lifted his head slightly and looked at the divide between the wall and the ceiling. His answer fully expressed the vibes of a charlatan. "You are a true seer," Bogda praised. "Next, I'll be heading to Vlad Street to thank that apothecary and buy the medicine he recommended." "Haven't you already recovered?" Klein expertly hid the shock in his voice. Bogda looked around and laughed when he confirmed that the receptionist was not paying attention to them. He chuckled softly and said, "The doctor mentioned a concoction of herbs that includes mummy powder. It is a prescription that would satisfy both men and women." I didn't believe the doctor back then, but I have no more doubts now. There's a prescription like that? Klein suddenly felt that the apothecary was a cheat, and suspected if he had pushed the person in front of him into a fiery pit of doom. He observed Bogda and confirmed that there was no problem with his aura. "Mummy powder?" Klein cautiously asked. "Yes, mummy powder. I have asked a friend. He said that even the nobles of Backlund are maniacally looking for such an item. It's a powder made by grinding mummies which gives men peak performance in bed. Even though it's disgusting and sounds dirty, it truly is a material used by the aristocrats." Bogda gave a detailed description. He had an eager desire in his eyes. "Mummies? Mummies made from corpses? Then grinding them to powder?" Klein was dumbfounded. He nearly retched in front of Bogda. Those nobles sure are hardcore. Just as he was about to advise Bogda against doing so, Glassy, who had suffered from a lung disease previously, stepped into the door and heard Bogda's description. "Yes, it's very effective. I would recommend that you head to Lawson's Folk Herb Store at Vlad Street. Mr. Lawson's secret recipe is very effective. Glassy took off his spectacles and leaned over with interest. He recommended with a hushed tone, my experience was very, very, very perfect. You know of it too. I was just about to head to Mr. Lawson's Folk Herb Store. Bogda's worries vanished completely. After a short conversation, he left the divination club in a hurry. Up until then, Klein was still a little dumbfounded. He waited till 5:20 in the afternoon before putting on his hat and picking up his black cane. He took a carriage down to Vlad Street, intending to observe the apothecary named Lawson Darkweed before deciding if he should notify the captain or not. 18 Vlad Street. Klein stood outside the herb store and saw the closed door, as well as a subletting notice. Quite a wary man, he muttered silently. Since this had happened, he no longer had to be troubled or perform any observations. Chapter 96, Daly's guess. By the afternoon of the next day, Klein had fully recovered from any signs of exhaustion. He walked into the Blackthorn Security Company with steady footsteps. Good morning, Klein. The weather is so cool and beautiful today, I'm looking forward to tonight's feast. Roseanne, who was wearing a light green dress, greeted him with a smile from behind the reception desk. Klein deliberately touched his stomach and said, Miss Roseanne, you shouldn't be talking about that so early in the morning. I'm already sick of today's mission that has yet to arrive. I only hope for the evening to arrive sooner. Me too. Roseanne chuckled. She looked to the left and right, then she beckoned for Klein to come closer. She lowered her voice and said, I met Madame Daly earlier. Spirit medium Madame Daly? Klein asked in surprise. The most famous spirit medium from Awa County had been living at Enmat Harbor all this time, and it wasn't a short distance from Tingen. Yes. Roseanne gave a firm nod and said, but, she has already left. Ah, she is my ideal beyonder. If I were to become a spirit medium, I would leave Tingen and travel all around the world by myself. To Intis, to Faysac, to Fainapotter, to the southern continent, to the vast prairies, primitive forests, and snow-covered plains. Lady, be aware of the Nighthawk's rules. Klein shook his head in amusement. Even Madame Daly has to apply and obtain permission to leave Enmat Harbor. I know that, but you can't just remind me about it now and shatter my dreams. Roseanne said, peeved. The truth is, I would never become a beyonder. It's too dangerous. I know when I'll die from sudden gunfire. From what I've seen, beyonders are basically people who turn themselves into monsters to fight against monsters. Archbishop Cheney said that we are guardians, but also a bunch of miserable wretches that are constantly fighting against threats and madness, Klein replied, sighing. The quote had left a deep impression on him. To fight against the abyss, we have to endure the corruption of the abyss. The two of them fell silent in unison. Roseanne was the first to break the silence as she pursed her lips towards the partition and said, Captain wanted you to meet him when you arrived. All right. With his hat and cane in hand, Klein passed through the partition and entered Dunn's office after knocking on the door. A middle-aged gentleman with deep and serene gray eyes and a high hairline put down his coffee cup and said with a smile. Daly was here. Can't say that I'm surprised, Roseanne had just informed me, Klein replied with a smile. Dunn didn't mind his humor but sighed. Daly was just transferred to the Backlund Diocese, which is the world's busiest and most crowded city. They have the highest population of beyonders and the most opportunities. She has a higher chance of becoming an archbishop or a senior deacon than me. Why? Klein asked curiously as he took a seat. Dunn thought for nearly 20 seconds before answering. She has a unique talent in mastering and exploiting sequence potions. I've mentioned the internal rule of the Nighthawks before. If you want to consume the next potion in the sequence, you'll have to wait 3 years and go through a strict examination to prevent any loss of control. But typically, 3 years is far from sufficient. I spent 3 years going from a sleepless to a midnight poet. It took me 9 years to go from a midnight poet to nightmare, a full 9 years. And to go from nightmare to sequence 6, I've already spent 3 years. I have no idea how many more years I need. When our bodies age and our energy starts to decline, even if we overcome the latent dangers, we shouldn't attempt advancing anymore. This is because the risk of losing control at that point is so high that no one is willing to risk it. As for Daly and I, we are different from most Beyonders. After she became a corpse collector, she handed in a special application after only a year. She hoped to consume the follow-up potion immediately. What surprised everyone was that she actually passed through the stricter examination and obtained the Gravedigger potion. It only took her 1 more year to go from Gravedigger to Spirit Medium. This year will be her 5th year as a Beyonder. She is only 24 this year, young enough to have many opportunities ahead of her. On the surface, she's the most famous spirit medium in Awa County, but she truly is an actual spirit medium. Isn't that acting? Old Neil had apparently mentioned that Madame Daly had similar tendencies. Klein felt that he had grasped the key reason for Madame Daly's quick ascension through the ranks. Captain, you're young enough as well. You're only in your 30s, Klein comforted Dunn, but added in his heart, it's just that your memory isn't that great. Dunn drank a sip of his coffee. He shook his head and smiled bitterly. Why didn't you ask Madame Daly about her method of mastering and exploiting sequence potions? Klein purposely asked. Dunn put down his coffee cup and massaged his temples as he spoke. She told me to become a true nightmare. I don't know what that means. Play the role of a nightmare. Man, a nightmare sounds sinister. Klein creased his eyebrows and temporarily fell silent. Then, Dunn took out his smoking pipe and sniffed at it. Daly and I discussed the possibility of Seer's follow-up potion being clown. Assuming that the member of the Seers didn't lie to you, she brought up an interesting hypothesis. What hypothesis? Klein asked hurriedly, his eyes turning bright. He had once used a divination method to determine if clown was the follow-up potion of Seer. The answer he received had been vague, but it seemed close to being a confirmation. Dunn's deep and serene gray eyes swept his gaze at him while he said in thought, a normal sequence pathway proceeds in a stepped manner. They advance according to a particular similarity. For instance, Sleepless, Midnight Poet, and Nightmare are all obviously related to the darkness of the night, as well as the peaceful sleep and tranquility that is generated from sleep. It can be imagined that every subsequent sequence would have identical traits, only with more power and a wider scope. They might be linked to secrets, disaster, horror, the crimson moon, etc. Certain sequence pathways appear unrelated, but when we analyze them in detail, we can still find similarities, such as assassin and instigator. Their implied similarity is to bring people calamities, pain, sorrow, and despair. Hence, the follow-up sequences should abide by this pattern. Klein paid close attention and asked proactively, but Seer and Clown doesn't have such a connection? Yeah. Dunn nodded and said, Daly believes that there might be sequence pathways that share another kind of relationship. After all, there's a lot we do not know. He paused for a moment before saying, Daly said that, in this sort of pathway, the low to mid-sequence potions would respectively provide the Beyonder an ability that seems brand new and unrelated to the others. When the Beyonder reaches a point of qualitative change, these abilities will mix into an abnormally powerful job that includes them all. In other words, the pathway doesn't advance step by step, but instead it's a relationship of dissection and combination. Klein listened intently, but he felt lost. Dunn lifted his right hand and said, a normal sequence pathway advances a bit at a time, just like a child growing up. A growing child becomes taller, stronger, heavier, and more mature from a young age. While special sequence pathways are more like, having said this, Dunn lifted up his thumb. This is sequence 9. Then, he lifted up his index finger. This is sequence 8. Then, he gradually lifted up the rest of his fingers. Each and every finger is independent, and doesn't seem to be related to the others. But in the end, when he said the word end, Dunn clenched his fingers into a tight fist. I understand now. Klein was suddenly enlightened. He agreed with Lady Daly's guess and the captain's metaphor. Maybe that's how it is? He nodded in deep thought. Sequence 8 Clown and Sequence 9 Seer are completely different and have brand new abilities. And according to the description from the Nighthawk's intelligence, the corresponding Sequence 7 and Sequence 8 Clown don't share any similarities either. Klein fell silent for a while before curiously pressing on. At which stage would the different abilities combine to form a qualitative change? Dunn took another sip of coffee and chuckled. Daly and I guessed Sequence 4. Why? Klein blurted out. Because according to the way the churches categorize sequences, Sequence 4 is the beginning point of the higher sequences. It is said that merely achieving such a level brings about qualitative changes in vitality and energy. In ancient times, Sequence 4 Beyonders were qualified to be called demigods in the fourth epoch. It's a pity that such Beyonders are very rare in this era, Dunn said wistfully. If Sequence 4 to Sequence 1 are high sequence Beyonders, then who are the low sequence Beyonders? Klein asked with interest. Sequences 9 through 7 were considered as low sequences 1,000 years ago. But, in recent centuries, Beyonders are few in number and each church has listed Sequence 7 as a mid-sequence. Dunn laughed in a self-deprecating manner. Sequence 9 and Sequence 8 are low sequences. Then, Sequences 7 through 5 are mid-sequences. Finally, those Sequence 4 and above are high sequences. Klein repeated in his head and inevitably felt a yearning for that. Emperor Roselle was a high sequence Beyonder. However, the higher the sequence, the greater the risk of losing control. Klein thought to himself in fear. He asked as though in a seemingly casual manner, what is the Sequence 4 potion for the Church of the Goddess called? In actual fact, I'm not sure. My security clearance isn't high enough for me to be privy to that information. I'll be able to read them when I become a diocese bishop or Nighthawk's deacon. Dunn shook his head and smiled. In fact, at least half of the church's 13 archbishops and 9 senior deacons at the top of the church's hierarchy are below Sequence 4. That's just me being optimistic. The archbishop in Sanguil, who became wanted, lost control when he tried to advance to Sequence 4. The one who stole sealed artifact 0-08? His potion was apparently called Gatekeeper. Klein thought and probed, is Sleepless Sequence 5 Gatekeeper? No, that's in Spirit Medium's pathway. You'll be allowed to access that information when you reach Sequence 7 and become a bishop or a captain of a Nighthawks team. Gatekeeper is Sequence 5 of the Spirit Medium pathway. Does it mean that it's keeping watch over the gates to hell? Or keeping watch over the gates to the spirit world? Klein guessed. Alright, go to Old Neil and continue with your studies. Dunn smiled and said, don't forget about dinner tonight, at Old Will's restaurant. Reservations have been made. I'll introduce you to the rest of the Nighthawks officially. Alright, I've already prepared the money. Klein forced a smile. No, there's no need. Have you forgotten that we have additional bonuses? The part about you completing an assigned mission. Dunn waved. Klein was momentarily taken aback before replying with a beaming smile, all right, Captain. He turned around and walked towards the door, while counting inwardly, 3, 2, 1. Why didn't Captain call me back? Klein dragged out 1 for a very long time, only to be surprised that Captain Dunn Smith hadn't forgotten at anything. A miracle. In the armory, Old Neil stole a glance at Klein, who was in a good mood. Don't be obsessed with tonight's dinner. You still have a lot of things to learn, such as more ritualistic magic, ancient Hermes, Dragonish, Elvish, and many more. Yeah, every afternoon besides your day off, you have to have at least 2 hours of combat training with an instructor. Combat training? Captain didn't mention it. Klein was shocked. Old Neil nodded and didn't hesitate to answer, he forgot. Chapter 97, Combat Teacher at 2 in the afternoon, outside of a simple 2-storied building that was in disrepair at the outskirts of the North Borough. Klein, who was in his probationary inspector uniform, looked at the weed-filled garden and the vines that had crept up the walls. He turned his head in surprise. "My combat instructor lives here? Shouldn't a combat artist who was selected by the Nighthawks be exceptional?" Leonard Mitchell, who had guided Klein there, snickered and said, "Don't underestimate Mr. Gawain because of his residence's surroundings. Although he was never conferred an aristocratic title, he was a true knight back in the day." Having said that, the poetic Nighthawk, who was dressed in a white shirt, black trousers, and buttonless leather boots, suddenly felt melancholic. He was active during the waning era of the knights. The warriors donning their armors would storm through enemy ranks despite the gunfire and cannon fire, destroying their enemies and redefining the battle lines. But alas, they were quickly met with the invention of the high-pressure steam guns and six-barrel machine guns. From then on, the knights had to gradually step down. Mr. Gawain met the same fate. More than 20 years ago, the Alwa Knights Order of Chivalry faced the most advanced weaponry of the Intis Republic Army. Sigh, every time I recall this, it seems like I'm touching the dust heaps of history. The poet in me stirs when thinking of this irreversible and fated destiny, but alas, I do not know how to compose the poem. Then what's the point in saying so much? Klein acted oblivious to Leonard's self-deprecation and gave a serious suggestion. "My university schoolmate once told me that the composing of poems requires a certain degree of talent. It's best you start by reading the classical poems anthology of the Lone Kingdom." Leonard's mood changed on a whim. He replied with a light-hearted tone, "I purchased that book a long time ago, as well as other titles, such as the selected poems of Emperor Roselle. I will work hard to become a true midnight poet." Mr. Seer, is he hinting at the acting method? Klein replied, as though he couldn't understand him, "You would still need books on grammar." "All right, let's enter." Leonard extended his hand and pushed open the half-closed metallic gates. The two of them then followed the path towards the house. They were still a distance away from the house when Klein saw a tall man walking out from behind the main door. He had short blonde hair, his brows already laced with white hairs. His facial features looked like they had been ravaged through age, his wrinkles were etched deep across his face. "What are you doing here?" the aged man asked in a deep voice. "Mr. Gawain, as per your contract with the police department, this probationary inspector will be learning the art of combat under your guidance," Leonard explained with a smile. "Combat? There's no need to study combat in this era." Gawain looked at Klein with turbid eyes and said in a dead voice, "You should learn how to draw your gun and shoot. You should master the most advanced weaponry." Was this the psychological trauma caused by the six-barrel machine guns and high-pressure steam guns? Klein didn't give a reckless reply. Instead, he smiled and looked at Leonard. "The art of combat is still a skill a policeman has to master. Most of the criminals we face are not those who must be executed on the spot. Some might not even have weapons. In that case, we have to rely on combat techniques," Leonard said, obviously prepared for the situation. With a dark expression, Gawain fell silent for more than 10 seconds before saying, "Throw a punch." He was speaking to Klein. Klein, who was not holding his cane, remembered the boxing matches he had seen in his previous life. He raised his arm and threw it forward. Gawain's lips twitched indiscernibly. He thought for a moment and said, "Kick." Tilting to the side slightly and twisting his hips, Klein tightened his thigh muscles and kicked forward with his right foot. Cough. Gawain covered his mouth and cleared his throat. He looked at Leonard and said, "I will honor my contract. But based on his foundation, he needs to come here 4 times a week, 3 hours each time, for the first month. You're the combat expert. It's up to you." Leonard nodded without hesitation. He smiled and said to Klein, "See you at dinner." After Leonard walked out the metallic gates, Klein asked out of curiosity, "Instructor, how should I begin practicing? Punching, or footwork?" As a qualified keyboard warrior, he understood the importance of footwork in combat. Gawain stood akimbo as he shook his head lethargically. "What you need now is strength training. See those? Those are 2 dumbbells made of steel. They shall be your partners for today. Other than that, you also have to practice deep squats, running, and rope skipping. Let us take those one set at a time. While Klein was still in a daze, Gawain suddenly raised his voice and said sternly, "Understood?" "Understood." At this moment, Klein felt as though he had returned to military training and was facing an inhumane instructor. "Change out of your clothes. There's a set of knight's training clothes on the sofa." Gawain suddenly sighed. He turned around and walked toward the black steel dumbbells. 6 in the evening, at a corner table of the Old Wool restaurant. Other than Fry, who was guarding Cheney's gate, all the members of the Blackthorn Security Company were present. There were 6 Nighthawks and 5 civilian staff. A white tablecloth was draped over the long table. Waiters carried over plates of food, portioned them before serving them to each individual guest. Klein saw steaks drenched in black pepper sauce. He saw bacon, sausages paired with mashed potatoes, egg puddings, asparagus, and specialty cheeses. He even saw rose-colored champagne. However, he had no appetite. The training in the afternoon had nearly made him vomit. Noticing the pale, newly inducted Nighthawk with turbid eyes, Dunn raised the glass of red wine in front of him and laughed. "Let us welcome our newest official member, Klein Moretti, cheers." The cold and introverted black-haired lady, Royale Ray Dean, the sleepless Kenley White, the sloppy Leonard Mitchell, as well as the white-haired, black-eyed midnight poet Sika Tron all raised their cups and looked at the new member of their team. Klein fought back the discomfort of the training and raised his glass of amber champagne. He stood and said, "Thank you." He clinked glasses with every Nighthawk, tilted his head back, and finished the small amount of champagne. "Is our Miss Author not going to say something on this occasion?" Dunn smiled as he looked at Sikatron. Sikatron was a lady in her 30s. She had average looks, but had an exceptional demeanor, one that was quiet and serene. Coupled with her few strands of graying hair, it added a unique charm to her. Klein had heard old Neil mention that this midnight poet had taken on a side job as an author and had attempted to submit her works to newspapers and magazines. Unfortunately, only a few smaller newspapers had accepted them. Sika smiled and looked at Dunn. "In order to make the term Miss Author into a reality, Captain, I think you should give me some funds to self-publish my work." Dunn laughed. "You should learn from old Neil and give me a more suitable reason. I'm most impressed with Mr. Neil in this department." Roseanne echoed in between her mouthfuls of roast mutton. Amidst the chatter and laughter, Leonard looked at Klein and said with a chuckle, "Are you so tired that you have no appetite to eat?" "Yeah." Klein sighed. "If you haven't touched your food yet, I can be of assistance." Leonard acted as though he didn't want to waste any food. Klein didn't mind. He nodded and said, "That wouldn't be an issue." And with that, a good portion of the food in front of him was eaten by Leonard and the rest. Nearing the end of the dinner, the waiters served plates of beef pudding and ice cream. Klein tasted ice cream and found it cold and sweet. It was particularly appetizing. Before he realized it, he had finished the ice cream drizzled with a blueberry sauce. And as a result of this, he started to feel the hunger pangs. It was a hunger which demanded recharging food that came after intense exertion. Swallowing his saliva, Klein looked to the front, only to see that all the plates were empty. There were no leftovers. "Let's end the dinner here, and give Klein a final toast," Dunn suggested. Before finishing his sentence, Klein asked, "Captain, may I order another plate of food?" The group fell silent after hearing such a request, only to break out into chuckles moments later. "Huh, you've finally recovered. No problem, order 2 plates if you want to." Dunn shook his head and laughed. While patiently waiting an unbearable amount of time, Klein heard his stomach growling. Finally, a freshly prepared black pepper steak was served before him. His fork and knife danced as Klein finished the medium-done steak in 90 seconds, tears nearly falling from his eyes. The meat juices and the fragrance of the sauce lingered in his mouth. Sometime later, Klein let out a satisfied sigh as he looked at his empty plate. He put down his knife and fork and took a sip of his champagne. "Waiter, the bill please." Dunn turned around and called for the waiter. The waiter went to the counter, then returned with the check. He gave a thorough breakdown. You opened 5 bottles of Desi champagne, each bottle being 12 soldi and 3 pence, a small glass of Southville red wine for 10 pence. Each black pepper beef steak was 1 soldi 2 pence. Each serving of beef pudding was 6 pence, the servings of ice cream was 1 soldi each. The total would be £5, 9 soldi, and 6 pence. £5, 9 soldi, and 6 pence? That's nearly my weekly salary. A restaurant is indeed much more expensive than eating at home. Klein clicked his tongue upon hearing that. He felt lucky that the captain had said that he didn't need to pay out of his own pocket. They had some petty cash from bonus earnings. He calculated the cost carefully and noticed that the most expensive portion of the meal was the alcohol. 5 bottles of champagne had cost more than £3. This is no different from Earth. Klein secretly rubbed his stomach and forced down the last of his champagne. The next morning, Klein felt bloated. He tried to get off the bed in his sleepy stupor. Just as he exerted strength, he was instantly awakened by his aching muscles. He felt as though his body wasn't under his control. What a familiar feeling. It's the same as that day after we got punished with frog jumps. Today is a rest day, but I still have to pay a visit to my mentor and see if I can borrow the monograph on the Hornacis main peak from the library at the university. Klein's lips twitched as he made his way outside with some effort. He wanted to draw a gasp with every step. Klein, what happened to you? Melissa, who had just come out of the bathroom, sized up her brother suspiciously for his odd posture and slow movement. Chapter 98. Mr. Azik, faced with his sister's question, all Klein could do was reply with a regretful smile, sore muscles. He originally believed that by consuming the sequence potion, his constitution would be enhanced as a Beyonder, but the harsh reality told him that a seer's stats points were all allocated to his spirituality, mind, intuition, and interpretation. It didn't aid him in adjusting to combat training quickly. As for the original Klein, he had focused on his studies early on and had suffered from malnutrition. That led him to possess a below-average physical condition. The fact that he was having after effects from working out was to be expected. Sore muscles? I remember you returning after dinner last night and you didn't do anything else. Does alcohol cause sore muscles? Melissa inquired with an inquisitive look. Does alcohol cause sore muscles? Sis, that question can't help but make me have inappropriate thoughts. Klein laughed dryly and said, No, this has nothing to do with alcohol. It was from yesterday afternoon. I joined the company's combat training. Combat? Melissa was even more astonished. Klein organized his thoughts and said, Well, this is what happened. I considered it and believe that as a historical and relic consultant of a security company, it's impossible for me to stay in the office or port warehouse forever. Perhaps there will come a day when I have to accompany them to the villages or an ancient castle, to the site of some relic. That might require me to hike, to cross rivers, and to walk a lot. I'll have to endure all sorts of tests posed by nature, so I have to possess a sufficiently healthy body. So you joined combat training to enhance your stamina? Melissa seemed to understand her brother's intention. That's right, Klein answered with great affirmation. Melissa said with a frown, But that isn't gentlemanly. Don't you always keep yourself to the standards of a professor? A professor only requires the ability to read historical documents, ponder over difficult questions, and maintain a polite and gentlemanly demeanor. Of course, I'm not saying that those aren't all good things. I prefer men who can solve problems on their own, regardless of whether that solution requires brawn or brain. Melissa smiled. Klein smiled and said, No, Melissa. Your definition of a professor contains a misconception. A true professor can communicate with people gently and politely, but he can also educate the other person using the principles of physics by raising a cane to convince someone when there is an obstacle in communication. Principles of physics. Melissa was momentarily at a loss, but she quickly understood what her brother was saying. She was suddenly unable to retort him. Klein didn't say anything more but widened his pace with great difficulty as he headed for the bathroom. Melissa stood there and looked for a few seconds. She suddenly shook her head and caught up to Klein. "Do you need my help?" She posed as if she was supporting someone. "No, there's no need to. I was hamming it up a bit earlier." Klein felt humiliated. He suddenly stood straight and walked normally. Watching her brother walk steadily to the washroom and close the door, Melissa pursed her lips and muttered, "Klein is getting more and more pretentious." I even believed that his muscle soreness was really that serious. In the bathroom, Klein stood behind the tightly shut door, his face suddenly contorting in pain. Ouch, ouch, ouch. He held his breath, tensed his body, and stood there for a good 7 or 8 seconds. When he finally went downstairs with great effort, had breakfast, and saw Benson and Melissa off, his soreness finally began to ease. After resting for a little while, Klein took his cane, donned his top hat, and left the house, strolling towards the public carriage stop. During the summer, Koei University had trees with shade-providing foliage, flourishing with birds and luxuriant flowers. It was peaceful and calm. Walking along the river, Klein took a turn towards the history department. Then, he found the 3-story building which showed its age and located his mentor's, Cohen Quinton's, office. He knocked and entered the room, but he was shocked to see that the man sitting at his mentor's seat was the academic, Azik. "Good morning, Mr. Azik, where's my mentor?" "We made an appointment by letter to meet here at 10, Klein asked, puzzled. Azik, who was Cohen Quinton's best friend and often debated with his mentor regarding academic topics, smiled and said, "Cohen had a last-minute meeting and went to Tianjin University. He asked me to wait for you here." He had bronze skin, an average height and build, black hair, brown eyes, and gentle facial features. Being in his presence brought on an indescribable feeling, as though you could see in the man's eyes that he had been through the vicissitudes of life. Under his right ear was a tiny mole that one wouldn't notice unless closely examined. Having said the reason, Azik suddenly frowned as he carefully observed Klein. Feeling confused by the sudden scrutiny, Klein looked at his attire. "Have I committed some breach of etiquette?" Tuxedo, black vest, white shirt, black bow tie, dark-colored trousers, leather boots with no buttons. Everything seems normal. Azik's brows eased and he chuckled softly. "Don't mind me. I suddenly noticed that you are way more energetic than before. You look even more like a gentleman now. Thank you for your compliment." Klein accepted it calmly and asked, "Mr. Azik, did my mentor manage to find the book Research of the Hornacis Main Peaks Relics in the school library?" "He found it with my assistance," Azik said, smiling gently. He then pulled open the drawer and took out a gray-covered book. "You are no longer a Koei University student anymore. You can read it here, but you cannot take it home." "All right." Klein delightfully took the academic monograph, and with a hint of fear. The book's design was fully in line with the current trends. It used hard paper as a hardcover and it was printed with an image like an abstract version of the main peak of Hornacis mountain range. Klein took a glance and found a seat. He flipped open the book and started reading carefully, line by line. As he became engrossed in the book, he suddenly realized that there was a cup of rich and fragrant coffee by his side. "Help yourself to the sugar and milk." Azik put down the silver saucer and pointed at the milk jar and sugar container. "Thank you." Klein nodded with gratitude. He added 3 cubes of sugar and a teaspoon of milk before continuing to read his book. The book, Research of the Hornacis Main Peaks Relics, was not a very thick book. Klein finished reading it when it was almost noon. He took note of a few noteworthy points. First, the settlement on the main peak of Hornacis Mountain and its surrounding area was obviously an advanced civilization, which existed as part of an ancient nation. Second, from their wall murals, their perspective on life appears similar to that of humans. I can assume for now that they were human. Third, they revered yet feared the darkness of the night. Hence, they called their god the ruler of the Evernight, mother of the sky. Fourth, the weirdest part is that researchers haven't found any graves in the entire area, which initially seems to indicate that the people didn't need to be buried, because they didn't die. However, that would be contradictory to the contents of the wall murals. In the wall murals, the people in the nation believed that death is not the end. They believed that their deceased family would protect them in the night. Hence, they would keep their deceased family members at home, on the bed, by their side, for a full 3 days. There is nothing beyond that for the wall murals, as it doesn't involve burials. Klein took another sip of coffee and continued to write down his afterthoughts in his notebook. Mother of the Sky, Sky Mother is such a grand title, while the ruler of the Evernight obviously overlaps with the Evernight goddess. Is this a contradiction at its roots? In the ancient remains on the main peak of the Hornaces mountain range and its surrounding area, every arrangement and decoration was well preserved. Even the wall murals didn't have any signs of damage. Before it was discovered, there seemed to be no disturbance at all. The table was arranged with cutlery, and there were dried stains of rot on the dining plates. In some rooms, there were half-filled bottles of alcohol that had almost turned into plain water. What happened to the nation's people? They seemed to have left their homes in a hurry, without taking anything with them, and they never returned. Considering how there are no burial grounds, this only makes it weirder. The author, Mr. Joseph, also mentioned that when he first discovered the remains, he even had the belief that the people residing there had just vanished all of a sudden. Klein stopped writing and cast his gaze at an illustration. On John Joseph's third visit to the main peak of the Hornaces mountain range, he had used a new camera model to shoot a monochrome photograph. In the photo, the lofty palace had a collapsed wall and was overgrown with weeds. It followed a grandeur style for its design. When he flipped to the photograph, Klein's first thought was that of the palace he had seen in his dream. The two styles were identical. The only difference was that the one he had dreamed of was on a peak and it was way more magnificent. It also had a huge chair, a seat of honor, that looked like it didn't seat a human. Countless translucent maggots clustered together and squirmed slowly beneath the chair. I can confirm that my dream is related to the ancient remains on the main peak of the Hornaces mountain range. That should be the nation of the Evernight, which was referenced in the Antigonus family's notebook. Klein nodded slightly and closed the book. At that moment, Azik, who was sitting opposite him, touched the inconspicuous mole under his right ear and said, "How was it? Found anything?" "Quite a bit. Take a look, I've written so many pages of notes." Klein pointed at the table and smiled. "I don't understand why you're suddenly so interested in this matter." Azik sighed and said, "Klein, when I was studying at the Backlund University, I had dabbled with some divination and did quite a bit of research on that. Well, I discovered that there is disharmony in your fate." "What? Divination? Are you talking to me about divination?" As a seer, Klein looked at Azik the academic in amusement. "How is it disharmonious?" Azik thought for a moment. "Have you encountered many strange coincidences in the past 2 months?" "Coincidences?" As he was indebted to Mr. Azik, Klein didn't dispute his question as he subconsciously began thinking. If we are talking about coincidences, the most obvious matter was when we were after kidnappers. We actually managed to find clues of the Antigonus family's notebook that was lost for days in the room opposite the kidnappers. Also, Ray Bieber didn't flee from Tingen in a hurry. Instead, he found a place to digest the power bestowed by the notebook, allowing for sealed artifact 2-049 to track him down easily. That seemed to be against common sense. Although Iyer Harson gave a reasonable explanation, I always had a nagging feeling that it was somewhat coincidental. Oh, Selena had stolen a glance at Honas Vincent's secret incantations, but she held back till her birthday dinner banquet to try it out, and I happened to discover it, which is quite a coincidence too. Otherwise, Honas Vincent wouldn't have been the only one to die so suddenly. Klein thought about it seriously for a few minutes and said, "There are 3. Neither too many, nor too frequent. Furthermore, there was nothing that indicated someone's involvement and guidance." Azik nodded slightly. As Emperor Roselle once said, a single coincidence is encountered by anyone. Twice is still normal. Thrice is when one should consider what internal factors are influencing those coincidences. Can you tell me anything else? Klein probed. Azik laughed and shook his head. I can only tell that there's some disharmony, but nothing else. You have to understand that I'm not a real seer. Isn't that basically equal to saying nothing? Mr. Azik is quite odd. He's playing a charlatan in front of a charlatan like me. Klein let out a breath, seizing the moment when Azik stood up. He pinched his glabella and activated his spirit vision. When he looked over, Azik's aura fully appeared before his eyes and everything seemed fairly normal. Unfortunately, I can only see the ether body and astral projection of a person above the gray fog. Klein thought carefreely as he tapped his glabella again whilst standing up. Chapter 99, Red Chimney. Late in the afternoon, Klein returned home and drew the curtains, allowing his room to slip into darkness. He took out his pen and paper and thought for a long time, finally writing down a sentence. The kidnapping of Elliot was due to extraordinary elements. As a seer, Klein had tried to divine if those coincidences were a consequence of unnatural developments, but the results showed otherwise. This time, he was influenced by Azik to look into these events again. He also drew lessons from the suited clown. He seriously designed an appropriate divination statement, eliminating any descriptions that might be vague or cause confusion. Yes, I should break down the three coincidences and divine them separately. Klein nodded in thought as he slowly removed the topaz from his wrist. He held the spirit pendulum with his left hand and allowed it to hang close over the divination statement on the paper. He collected himself and entered a state of cogitation. With his eyes closed, Klein started chanting repeatedly. The kidnapping of Elliot was due to extraordinary elements. As he recited the statement over and over again, Klein opened his eyes and looked at the pendulum, only to see the topaz turning counterclockwise slowly. It's still a negative, Klein muttered to himself. He designed several other divination statements, but the results persisted. There was nothing strange about that incident. He then separately divined the event of Ray Bieber's stay in Tianjin and Selena's magic mirror divination incident, but the answers for both events were normal. Was I, a real seer, frightened by the charlatan Mr. Azik? Besides, Captain and the others didn't feel that anything was off. Klein laughed and shook his head. But he remained cautious. He planned on using the dream divination technique to get a final confirmation. After some thought, he changed the divination statement to fit the change in method. The true reason for Elliot's kidnapping. As he scribbled with the fountain pen, Klein paused and pondered over his words. After reading it over and over again, he tore the slip of paper and walked toward his bed. He relaxed and laid down. With the divination statement in hand, Klein quickly fell asleep with the help of cogitation. He found himself in a contorted, broken world. Regaining his senses, he began swimming through the blur. Gradually, he saw the few kidnappers. He saw them lose their final chip at a gambling table, saw them obtain guns from underground sources, and saw them survey the area. They even rented the apartment across Ray Bieber's apartment as their hideout. These didn't form a continuous scene, instead, they were presented in the form of flashing pictures. Klein couldn't find anything that was abnormal. Furthermore, it had also aligned with the statements given by the kidnappers. After exiting the dream, Klein separately divined the other two incidents but had the same result. Their developments followed logic. The coincidences were really coincidences. I was indeed overthinking things. Mr. Azik is merely a divination enthusiast. Klein stabilized his pendulum and shook his head with a bitter smile. He was about to draw the curtains and allow sunlight into the room when he froze. From the original Klein's impression of Mr. Azik, he is a dependable and trustworthy person. He had never once said anything baseless. Even if he was always quarreling with Mentor, it was limited to academic topics, and each of them had their reasons. If he was truly a mere divination enthusiast, he wouldn't have interacted with me like that. And the memories of original Klein has nothing about him liking divination. Of course, this could be due to the loss of a corresponding memories. Klein frowned and couldn't ease his worries. He needed a way to confirm this. He suspected that Mr. Azik had unwittingly come across some insider information and was trying to remind him by using divination as an excuse. How should I confirm this? Klein paced back and forth across the dark room, trying to recall the other divination techniques he knew. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. He suddenly halted as an idea came to him. Let's assume that these coincidences are dubious. I'm unable to divine a result either because my sequence isn't high enough or I'm being affected by outside interference, but I can change my environment. I can change my environment to someplace that is even more mysterious and even harder to understand. Klein felt pumped. He pulled open his drawer and took out a silver dagger. He concentrated and allowed his spirituality to flow out from the tip of the dagger, becoming one with his surroundings. With each step he took, the wall of spirituality sealed off the entire room. Klein planned on doing the divination above the gray fog, to do the divination in that mysterious world. In the magnificent ancient divine hall above the endless gray fog. Klein sat at the seat of honor on one end of the bronze table. Before him was a piece of goatskin he willed into existence. He lifted a pen and tried writing the divination statement as he had previously. The kidnapping of Elliot was due to extraordinary elements. He held the spirit pendulum and hung it low. Klein quickly composed himself as he turned silent and ethereal. Half closing his eyes, he recited the statement 7 times, using his spirituality to interact with the spiritual world that stood above all. Feeling the tug of the silver chain, Klein opened his eyes to look at the pendulum. The sight made him freeze immediately. The pendulum was spinning clockwise. This meant that there was an extraordinary element behind Elliot's kidnapping. This was completely different from the result he had gotten in the outside world. There were no traces of any interference. Such power or means is terrifying. What's the motive of the person behind this? Is my fate intertwined with the Antigonus family's diary? Klein was immensely shocked. He lost his calm and the rotation of the pendulum slipped into chaos. He put down the topaz and rubbed his glabella. His expression was abnormally grave. After contemplating for a few seconds, he didn't attempt to divine the other 2 events. Instead, he wrote a new divination statement, the true reason for Elliot's kidnapping. He held the paper in his hand and recited the statement 7 times. Klein leaned back and fell into sleep above the fog. Soon, he saw a boundless, illusory grayish-white fog. The fog dissipated slowly, revealing a colorful grass plain filled with flowers. The space behind the flowers and the plains was folding into itself, like a monster that had come alive. Klein tried his best to look forward, barely making out an image of a dark red chimney. At this point, the scene before him shattered, putting an end to his dream. Klein abruptly straightened his back in the majestic divine hall. His heart was beating wildly without reason. Phew. It felt like I had just spied on a terrifying thing. He took in 2 deep breaths to stabilize his chaotic emotions. Tap. 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 Klein tapped on the side of the table sometime later and slipped into deep thought. Red chimney, garden, grass plains. How is this related to the person behind all of this? I cannot determine his motive from the coincidences, nor can I conclude that there is any evil intent. In the midst of this thinking, Klein felt alarmed, for himself, Captain, Fry, and the others. We are like puppets dancing on a string. What's even scarier is that we thought so highly of ourselves. Sigh. I don't know how to raise this matter to Captain. Old Neil's divination produced the same results as mine in the outside world. If they ask me to confirm it in front of them, I have no way of doing that. Klein rubbed his temples as if he had a headache. After nearly 20 seconds of calm, he began divining the event of Ray Bieber's stay in Tingen. Similarly, he first used spirit dowsing. This time, Klein was shocked to see his topaz hang motionless. It was neither a confirmation or rejection of the statement. Strange, he muttered. He started to guess the reasons for this phenomenon. The person behind this has sensed my divinations and engaged in countermeasures. Following this, he tried the dream divination technique, but all he saw were fragmented pieces of fog. He no longer made any new discoveries. The results of Selena's magic mirror divination incident were the same. Klein could almost confirm his conjecture at this point. Since he had no way of notifying Captain Dunn-Smith for the time being, he had an unprecedented motivation to improve his abilities. I must head to the divination club later and quickly succeed in my acting to digest the seer potion. Also, I have to confirm whether the clown potion is indeed the subsequent sequence of seer, as well as gather clues about it. In addition, I have to interact more with Mr. Azik and see if I can dig up whatever inside information he holds. Klein held his forehead with his right palm and quickly drew up a plan, and determined his focal point. After some thought, a goatskin appeared in front of him again. He picked up his pen and wrote, "The corresponding sequence 8 of sequence 9 seer is clown." From his prior experience, the present Klein was completely convinced that his divination abilities were augmented and enhanced above the gray fog. Just like how raids are usually successful, is this the result of having good luck? He muttered and picked up his spirit pendulum. Sometime later, Klein received a definitive answer. The corresponding sequence 8 of sequence 9 seer was clown. He then wrote on the paper once again. The corresponding sequences 8, 7, 6, and 5 of seer would grant at least one brand new, unrelated power. Klein exhaled as he tried spirit dowsing again. However, he saw the topaz hang motionlessly without any rotations. There isn't enough information to complete the divination and receive a revelation, he muttered to himself while seemingly deep in thought. Then, he set down the silver chain and began considering the required statement for a dream divination. Nearly 20 seconds later, he picked up his fountain pen and wrote seriously, "Clues to the clown potion." Chapter 100, Interpreting Symbols, Clues to the Clown Potion. On the seat of honor at the ancient bronze table, Klein repeated the divination statement a few times before leaning back and entering a deep sleep. His surroundings quickly became peaceful and quiet. He saw a hazy view, with countless distorted and blurry scenes flashing past, just like drops of morning dew on tender flower petals. Gradually, Klein grasped his spirituality and came to his senses. He saw a fireplace before him with a rocking chair in front of it. Sitting on it was an old woman dressed in black and white. Although he couldn't see her face since she was hanging her head low, Klein's gut feeling told him that she was an old lady. And he was pretty certain about it. The old lady was facing a desk directly. There were newspapers and tin cans inlaid with silver on the desk. Klein found the scene before his eyes very familiar, and he quickly recognized what he saw. This was where Ray Bieber and his mother stayed. This was where he saw a bloated cadaver for the first time. There are clues that point to the clown potion here? Just as Klein's thoughts flashed past, the scene around him transformed. It was a grayish-white warehouse, hidden among identical buildings. There were white bones scattered all around, and a few balls of flesh that looked like they had been squashed by a boulder. In the middle of the warehouse was a grayish-white object that was the size of a fist. Its surface was filled with ditches and it looked soft but ductile. It looked like a brain that had been extracted out of a living being. Just as Klein recognized the scene and recalled something, the scene before him distorted like rippling water before transforming into another new blurry scene. A naked body was laid on a long table covered with a white cloth. There were some bluish, discolored patches on the corpse's skin. Klein suddenly knitted his eyebrows and muttered, "It was first the images of Ray Bieber's hiding place and his remains, and now, it's related to the brand on the suited clown's wrist?" Just as he attempted to speculate what the scenes meant, the scene suddenly changed again. A marble coffee table, a set of 2 leather couches, and a chandelier that hung high on the ceiling. There were 3 people, Klein Moretti, who had black hair, brown eyes, and a scholarly temperament, a wealthy man with a chubby body and pale skin, and a beautiful young lady with fishnet gloves. Following that, it was another 3 people and an object, a middle-aged man in a black robe who had thick spiky brown hair, a wealthy man with a chubby body and pale skin, a half-century-old elder with messy eyebrows, thin brown hair, and gray-blue eyes, and a black notebook on the round table in between all of them, a notebook that exuded an ancient and distant air. The Antigonus family's notebook. Klein suddenly sat up straight and the dream vanished. Looking outside the divine hall where there was boundless gray fog and crimson stars, he thought in both shock and confusion. I was divining for clues to the clown potion. Why would the Antigonus family's notebook show up? Let me think, that chubby guy was Welch. Yes, Welch, an unfortunate fella who bought the Antigonus family's notebook and triggered a sequence of incidents. The beautiful young lady wearing fishnet gloves was Naya. I remember, the marble coffee table and leather couch combination is a hallmark of Welch's place. I saw spirit medium Daly there. In other words, what I saw was Welch's living room. It was a scene where the original Klein and his two classmates were discussing the notebook. Klein calmed himself down and tapped on the edge of the long bronze table rhythmically. Then, what does the last scene represent? The notebook appeared, Welch appeared. Could it be the scene where he bought the ancient item? There were another two people, and one of them looked very familiar. I feel like I've seen the middle-aged man in the classic black robe somewhere before. That spiky brown hair, severe dark eye circles. Yes, I know who is he now. Honas Vincent from the Divination Club, the Honas Vincent who died peacefully after Captain snuck into his dream, having learned that Selena secretly obtained the secret incantation from him. No way, he was the one that sold the notebook to Welch? Everything appears to be coming full circle. The world sure is small. No, Tingen is really small. On careful thought, it really is a possibility that Honas Vincent wasn't an ordinary fortune-teller. He was obviously deep into mysticism and obtained the attention of an ancient evil god. He had the channels, ability, and opportunity to acquire the notebook that was accidentally released by the secret order. It's no wonder Captain and company never figured out where Welch bought the notebook. Their investigative approach was entirely wrong. They had attempted to investigate via the antique market. But when the actual whereabouts of the notebook was found, they gave up on that lead. What a pity, Honas Vincent just passed away not too long ago. Otherwise, we definitely could have found out something regarding the notebook. Since he was involved in mysticism, he should have researched the notebook. His death was way too coincidental. However, there was another person at the scene, a man in his 50s. He might know quite a bit of what happened. Klein stopped tapping his fingers on the edge of the table and looked through every scene of his dream divination once more. Ray Bieber's house, Ray Bieber's hideout spot, the remains of Ray Bieber, the brand on the suited clown's wrist, Welch's house, Welch, Naya, and original Klein's exchange, Welch, Honas Vincent, and the Antigonus family notebook's group photo. Besides the brand on the suited clown, everything else is directly related to the Antigonus family's notebook. But I had divined for clues to the clown potion. This isn't scientific, nor does it make mystical sense. After becoming a seer, Klein once tried to divine where Welch had bought the Antigonus family's notebook, but he never considered using the unique qualities that the area above the gray fog possessed. As such, he had failed to receive any revelations, but now, he had chanced upon the truth by divining something separate. After spending nearly 20 seconds to calm down, Klein summarized the context provided by Roselle's diary and attempted to interpret his dream divination. The first possibility, Zeradol, or should I say, the secret order, was searching and pursuing the relics of the Antigonus family. So, the symbolic meaning of the dream is to use matters related to the Antigonus family to lure the secret order into appearing, so as to obtain the clown potion's formula. The second possibility, the clown potion's formula, is directly recorded in the Antigonus family's notebook. The fact that the Zeradol family is seeking the relics of the Antigonus family implies that they share very deep connections. They could have been allies or enemies. Hence, it seems fairly natural that the Antigonus family possessed parts of their sequence. Things would be obvious if they were allies, but enemies are the ones who would know each other the best. But the second explanation wouldn't be able to link it to the brand on the suited clown. Sigh, I do wish that the second explanation were true though. When the Holy Cathedral finds an expert to interpret the notebook, I would be able to obtain the clown potion without any risk. It seems that the first explanation is the most plausible. My gut feeling as a seer tells me that there might be a deeper symbolic meaning. Having thought of this, Klein massaged his forehead and suddenly realized the limitations of a seer. Unless it was a very simple and straightforward sign, a seer had to be extremely careful when making interpretations. It was just like walking on the edge of the abyss or walking on a thin layer of ice over a lake surface. The suited clown's outcome was an actual and bloody example of what a single mistake in interpretation or failure to grasp a key point could result in. In that instant, Klein had an illusion of himself mastering the true essence of a seer. He seemed to be just one step away from digesting the potion completely. "Thank you for enlightening me with your life." "Praise the lady," he muttered and drew a crimson moon before his chest. Then he divined whether Azik had good intentions or if he was an amazing beyonder. He received confirmations for both of them. Eventually, the continuous divinations exhausted Klein. He had no choice but to stop churning through his thoughts and decide on the crucial matters that he needed to attend to. "I have to find the man that appeared in the same scene with Welch, Honas Vincent, and the Antigonus family's notebook as soon as possible. I can begin my search with the Divination Club. I can't just confront Mr. Azik. Yes, he might be a mid-sequence beyonder of the life school of thought, but there's a lack of information, making it impossible for me to divine." Phew. Klein let out a breath and conjured the portrait of the half-century-old elder with messy eyebrows, thin brown hair, and gray-blue eyes on the goatskin that appeared before him. This was the third person present when the Antigonus family's notebook was traded between Welch and Honas Vincent. Looking at the portrait, Klein suddenly fell into a dilemma. "I can't draw." During art class in primary school, I was always the one receiving the greatest criticism from the teachers. Should I use ritualistic magic like old Neil? This was done by praying to the goddess. If I were to use the uniqueness of the area above the gray fog, I would be in trouble if the divinities noticed something amiss. Hold on a second, perhaps I can pray to myself. Transmitting images and transmitting voices are similar. Although I'm temporarily unable to access the mysterious power above the gray fog, accomplishing such a minor matter shouldn't be a problem. Having thought of this, Klein immediately emanated his spirituality to envelop himself to stimulate the feeling of falling. Back in his bedroom, he lit the gas lamp and prayed. "The fool that doesn't belong to this era, you are the mysterious ruler above the gray fog, you are the king of yellow and black who wields good luck. I pray for your revelation and pray that you allow me to draw what I've seen." After reciting the incantation, Klein didn't splash essential oils or burn any herbs to gain the help of their powers. It was just that informal when praying to oneself. There were suddenly murmurs in his ears as he saw the 4 black dots that formed a square surface on the back of his hand. He walked 4 steps counterclockwise and recited the incantation before penetrating the maniacal chaos to return to the area above the gray fog. This time he didn't see any of the crimson stars shrinking or expanding. But behind the seat of honor at the long bronze table, the strange symbol formed by a partial pupilless eye and partial contorted lines shimmered weakly as it produced illusory prayers. Klein held his ear to it and listened. After making sure that there were no mistakes, he conjured the portrait of the third person, and cast it towards the flowing light in accordance to the prayer's format. After everything was done, he immediately left the mysterious world above the gray fog and returned to his bedroom. Just as he found his footing, a portrait surfaced immediately in front of Klein's eyes. Furthermore, he sensed a weak and illusory power augmenting him. He picked up a fountain pen and found a piece of white paper and expressed his intent. Klein was surprised to find his right hand moving uncontrollably as it quickly drew lines. Before long, he saw a lifelike portrait of the third person. After writing down the hair and eye colors, as well as other unique characteristics, Klein heaved a sigh of relief despite the spasms of his right hand. The illusion before his eyes rapidly dissipated. Chapter 101, Unexpected Clue. House Street, Divination Club. Klein pressed down on his half-top hat and walked along the stairway towards the main door. he wasn't dressed in his usual formal wear. Today, he was wearing a white shirt and a light-colored vest, paired with a thin black windbreaker, making him look more spirited than he had before. This set of clothing was more suitable for combat and had only cost him £1, including the fee for the small pocket that he had sewn into the vest. Compared to the suit he had purchased, it was so cheap that it brought tears to his eyes. He stroked the revolver in his holster, as well as the metal bottles in his tiny inner pocket. Klein then took out the portrait and entered the divination club. Without any surprise, he met the beautiful attendant, Angelica. "Good afternoon, Mr. Moretti. I thought you would come only a few days later." Angelica was taken aback at first before she immediately revealed a brilliant smile. Klein took off his hat and sighed. "Good afternoon, Miss Angelica. I had a dream at noon. I dreamed about Mr. Hannas Vincent and matters regarding him. You know that, as a fortune-teller, I absolutely cannot overlook any dream. It could be a revelation from the divine." Confused by his charlatan-like words, Angelica nodded in thought and asked out of curiosity, "What did you dream of?" "I saw Hannas Vincent arguing with someone." Klein passed her the folded piece of paper in his hand. As Angelica unfolded the portrait, he pinched his glabella and observed the color of her emotions. This person, Angelica looked at the realistic portrait and slipped into deep thought. Klein saw her emotions turn into a thinking blue, a normal reaction. This person, Angelica muttered once again. She slowly looked up and said, "I've met him before." Klein's mind whirled as he immediately asked, "When was it?" "I can't remember the exact date. Maybe a month ago. I saw him send Mr. Vincent to the door and they were softly discussing something. I have a deep impression of him because of his thick and messy eyebrows, as well as Mr. Vincent's rare smile," Angelica described as she recalled. "Yes, he had a pair of grayish-blue eyes and, like most men his age, had little hair on his head." "Did you meet him again before or after that?" asked Klein gently. Angelica shook her head. "No, I am certain of that. I don't even know his name. To be honest, if it wasn't you, I would have suspected that any person showing me a portrait like this is a policeman investigating Mr. Vincent's death. Heh, I don't find it odd no matter what revelation you receive, for you are a true seer." "My apologies, I am a policeman." Klein retorted silently as he sighed and said, "A true seer would understand how minuscule he truly is compared to the vastness of fate. We can only see a hazy corner, forever receiving revelations, but never answers. We must reflect upon them constantly and keep up our respect and fear. We must decipher these hints with caution and not see ourselves as the intelligent ones who have taken control of fate." By summarizing what he had figured out over the past few weeks, Klein suddenly realized that his spirit vision turned clearer. He could even faintly make out the details within Angelica's aura. At that instant, he felt like a short-sighted man who was wearing glasses that suited him. Has my seer potion begun to produce clear signs of digestion?" Klein was stunned in disbelief. "I never imagined that a seer like you can still maintain such fear and respect towards fate." "It's truly admirable," said Angelica earnestly. She had seen too many people in the divination club who claimed to see through the truth and change fate after learning a few divination methods. Klein retracted his gaze and chuckled. "The more you know, the better you can understand how small we truly are." As he was saying this, he checked his body's condition and reflected on his past experiences. He could basically narrow the essence of the acting technique to actions corresponding to the name of the potion, understanding the hidden laws governing the role, as well as strictly abiding by these laws. Only by doing so could he change the state of his body, heart, and soul, making them closer to the remnant psyche in the potion, so as to gradually digest it. The acknowledgement of a seer's identity was only a factor on the surface. The reason why it made one's spirituality feel light had to do with how the feedback strengthened one's affirmation of particular divination actions. And these actions collectively formed the rules for digesting the seer potion. To help others interpret revelations and guide them in a better direction, yet constantly maintain one's fear and respect towards fate. One cannot be too egoistical, too proud, or blindly believe one's interpretations. These are the laws I can think of for the time being, as well as the essence of the acting technique that will guide me towards the future. If it continues to be this successful, I won't need half a year. Perhaps in 2 or 3 months, or even 2 to 3 weeks' time, I'll be ready to completely digest the potion. That sign was extremely obvious. It's no wonder the mysterious Mr. Zeradal said that the Beyonder will clearly sense it when the potion is fully digested. There's no need for anyone to teach them. It is what it is. Just like now, although my spirit vision has been enhanced a little, I know very well that this is only a pit stop in the digestion process and not the final destination. With this in mind, Klein couldn't help but thank the suited clown for teaching him with his life. If it wasn't for him, he would probably spend months at the divination club, summarizing the rules of a seer through numerous attempts, for better or for worse, before he began acting strictly. Mr. Moretti, I sometimes even think of you as a philosopher, Angelica said with a sigh upon hearing Klein's reply. In my circle of friends, the term philosopher is used to scold somebody. Klein was in a good mood. With that said, he bowed, wore his hat, and left after bidding farewell. Although Angelica was unaware of the gentleman's name or identity, Klein was in no way depressed. What he learned was sufficient enough for him to engage in the next phase of his plan. 36 Zutland Street. Inside Blackthorn Security Company. Dunn looked at the portrait in his hands with his deep gray eyes. You wish to carry out a search for this person? Yes. Klein had long prepared a reason for this. Captain, didn't I mention that I would head to the divination club to observe the reactions of its members on Honas Vincent's sudden death? I didn't discover anything yesterday, but I accidentally found out today that the person in the portrait had appeared with Honas Vincent once and was secretly discussing something with him. I flipped through our team's investigation report just now, but I didn't discover any person resembling him in the report. There were no loopholes in his description. Even if Dunn Smith were to take this portrait to the divination club, he would get the same answer from Angelica. Dunn cast his gaze away from the portrait and laughed. From the looks of it, the compensation funds weren't a waste. Captain, isn't your memory bad? Why would you mention the compensation at this point in time? Klein maintained a smile and didn't say a word. Was this drawn by you? Dunn asked in passing. Yes. I drew it with the help of ritualistic magic, Klein replied, completely honest. Of course, speaking the truth and revealing the whole truth were two different matters. Dunn nodded slightly and said, get old Neil to make a few more sets. I'll get Kenley and Royale to investigate and seek the cooperation of the police department. If this clue is of any use, you would have contributed greatly once again. May Goddess bless us. Klein tapped 4 spots on his chest as he appeared abnormally devout. For him, all he needed from Dunn and company was to figure out the name and identity of the man in the portrait. He could divine his location above the gray fog. Despite it being his day off, Klein didn't immediately return home after leaving the Blackthorn Security Company. Instead, he took the public carriage to the harbor and arrived in front of the Evil Dragon Bar's entrance. In his considerations, although a seer lacked the means to directly engage in combat with an enemy or the means to cast spells quickly, combat could be classified in many ways. Not all battles were chance encounters. As long as he had sufficient time to prepare, a seer could similarly deal with an enemy using ritualistic magic. It was exactly how he resolved the magic mirror divination incident at Selena's house. And this also meant that it was best if a seer brought along the essential oils, herbs, and tiny candles to avoid being in a situation where they were unavailable when they were needed most, thus, resulting in a helpless death. After all, not everyone was like Selena, who had an entire assortment of mysticism items which could be used. As for the ones he applied for, as Klein had practiced frequently, he had used up most of them. He kept what was left in his tiny inner pocket. He patted the cash note in his pocket and pushed open Evil Dragon Bar's door and strode in. It was noon and there weren't many customers in the bar. Nor were there any rat baiting or boxing matches. It was quiet and not lively enough. Klein observed the guests drinking beer and playing cards as he walked toward the billiard room that led to the underground market. At that moment, he saw a muscular old man walk out with a torn admiral's jacket draped over his shoulders. "Were you the friend old Neil brought last time?" Reeking with the smell of alcohol, the blue-eyed, messy brown-haired elder sized up Klein and laughed. Klein guessed at his identity and took off his hat and bowed. "Yes, how might I address you? Old Neil often mentions you." "I'm the boss here, Swain." The blue-eyed elder's arms were thick and brawny. He had firm muscles and had the bearing of a military officer. Former Tinjin mandated Punisher captain. Rumor has it that he was once part of the Royal Navy. Klein replied politely, "Yes. If you're in need of money, feel free to approach me." Swain laughed as he mentioned before walking towards the bar counter. At that moment, Klein's heart stirred as he immediately shouted, "Wait a moment, Mr. Swain. I have something I would like to ask of you." Swain halted in his steps, turned halfway around, and said with a chuckle, "You look, well, very similar." "No, I'm not having memory issues." The corner of Klein's lips twitched as he pointed at the portrait he drew and asked, "Have you met this gentleman before?" He suddenly realized that Selina had likely been brought by Honas Vincent to the underground market. This resulted in Elizabeth's knowledge of the evil dragon bar as well. Then, could the man in the portrait who had some relationship with Honas Vincent have come here before? Swain took a careful look and replied affirmatively, "I remember him. He had asked me if I had documents or items related to the main peak of the Hornacis mountain range." Documents and items related to the main peak of the Hornacis mountain range? Klein was taken aback as he suddenly connected that to another matter. Back when he was borrowing the journal issue related to the main peak of the Hornacis mountain range at Deweyville Library, the librarian had casually mentioned that someone had just returned it. Therefore, he still remembered very cleverly and didn't need to flip through his name cards to determine if the man existed. Could the gentleman who borrowed the journal issue before me be the one in the portrait? The gentleman that had witnessed the exchange of the Antigonus family's notebook. Chapter 102, Cloth Merchant. The more Klein thought about it, the more likely it seemed. Otherwise, who would have borrowed those random journal issues for no reason? Yes, research regarding the main peak of the Hornacis mountain range is quite an unpopular field. Other than the corresponding lecturers and associate professors, the common hobbyist would have never heard of it. Even the original Klein, who was a history graduate, only knew about it from the Antigonus family's notebook. Although Tinjin is a city of universities, there wouldn't be that many people who would be interested in the topic. And even if there is anyone interested, most of them would remain within the university's compounds. There would be no need to borrow the book from the Deweyville Library. The most important point is that the book happened to be borrowed only recently. By analyzing it this way, there really is a problem. I wasn't sharp enough and failed to realize it. Sigh, it looks like I have no talent at being a detective or acting like Sherlock Holmes. While these thoughts raced through his mind, the boss of Evil Dragon Bar, Swain asked in puzzlement, "Is there a problem?" Since there were customers and bartenders around, he could only ask indirectly. "Nothing at all. I'm just wondering how I can investigate this gentleman. As you know, Honas Vincent died at his home." Klein had long prepared his excuse. He didn't want to make the mandated punishers become interested in the ancient relics from the main peak of the Hornacis mountain range. Vincent was one of the rather famous fortune-tellers in Tinjin City. He often came here. Swain had indeed given a perfunctory answer, but as he recalled, he said, "Now that I think about it, the gentleman in the portrait did come together with Vincent at the very beginning. That is exactly what I wanted to know." "Do you remember his name?" Klein pressed immediately. Swain shook his head and chuckled. "I won't ask for my customers' names or identities unless I knew them to begin with, like old Neil." "All right then." Klein deliberately revealed a saddened look. To him, it didn't matter if Swain knew, because he could check the Deweyville Library. To borrow books from a privately funded library, he had to leave personal information, and his identification must have had sufficient credibility. After all, Klein had relied on an introduction letter from a senior associate professor before he obtained a library card. Even if the gentleman had forged his information, it is very likely that he left some clues which can be helpful to my divination. Klein watched Swain as he returned to the bar counter before entering the billiard room in deep thought. He wasn't in a hurry to head to the Deweyville Library for his investigations. He planned on completing his purchases first. After all, it was unknown if he would encounter danger and be required to use ritualistic magic for subsequent developments. After passing through a few rooms, Klein arrived at the underground market. There were a few stalls and customers, a clear indication that it wasn't peak hour yet. Just as he took a step forward, he suddenly saw the monster, Adamasol, who could smell the scent of death, standing in a corner. The young man was pale, and his eyes gave off a hint of terror and madness. He had also noticed Klein as he looked over. As they made eye contact, Adamasol suddenly extended his hands to cover his face. He moved toward the corner of the wall in a panicked state. Soon, he moved to a side door beside him and staggered as he ran out. "Is that necessary? I just nearly blinded you the last time. But I didn't do anything. Seriously, it's as if I'm the devil." Klein's facial expression was somewhat stiff. He shook his head and smiled. He stopped thinking about the monster and came to a stall. He started shopping with a goal in mind. After about half an hour, Klein spent a few pounds, which was most of his secret stash of money. He counted the 3 pounds and 17 soldi he had left, and he felt his heart ache. However, he touched the small metal bottle in the inner pocket of his black windbreaker. This is the floral essence, Amantha, which Madame Daly used previously. This is powder mixed with drago tree bark and leaves. Essential oil which is extracted from slumber flowers. Dried chamomile petals. This is holy night powder which I previously produced myself. Klein recalled the items stored in every tiny pocket of his and repeated them. He did it to prevent himself from failing to find the ingredient that he would need at a crucial moment. Relying on his unique traits in mysticism, he quickly finished memorizing them and walked toward the door. Suddenly, he saw a somewhat familiar figure in the corner of his eyes. It was a young lady in a casual green dress. Her smooth black hair was soft and glistening. She had a round face with long eyes. They gave her a sweet look and a refined bearing. "It's the girl who was shivering strangely on the public carriage. She does seem fine. I never expected her to be a mysticism enthusiast." Klein slowed down and thought for a few seconds before finally recalling who she was. He had to admit that, other than Justice who he had never seen clearly, the young lady was the most beautiful girl he had seen ever since he transmigrated into this world. The sweet and refined girl stood before a stall that sold mysticism books and, in a breach of etiquette, kneeled to rub her fingers against an ancient book. The ancient book was bound with a black hardcover. The book cover had the words, "Book of Witches," in Hermes. It records the black magic of witches. Although I haven't dared to try them, someone I know did, and it really worked. The vendor seized the opportunity to promote the book. The beautiful lady thought and asked, "In your mind, what does a witch look like?" "A witch? A wicked person who brings calamities, disease, and pain," the vendor answered after some thought. Klein didn't hear their conversation because he had already quickly walked out the front entrance. He was rushing to the Deweyville Library in a hurry to settle everything before returning home to cook dinner for his brother and sister. Tomato oxtail soup was on the menu. Backlund. Crown Turf Club. Audrey Hall wore a long white dress with engagiantes and ruffled edges, as well as lace around her chest. She stood in a VIP room and watched the horses gallop. She wore a veiled hat decorated with blue ribbons and silk flowers, and a pair of light-colored fishnet gloves. Her cold and distant gaze seemed out of place in the bustling venue. Just as the racehorse breasted the tape, her friend Viscount Glaint came closer and said with a suppressed voice, "Audrey, every time I see you, you look beautiful from a different angle. How can I help you?" In the past, Audrey might have basked in the young man's compliment, but now she could see Glaint's ulterior motives through his speech and attitude. Due to the early passing of Glein's father, he had inherited his title of nobility at the age of 20. He was a slightly skinny young man. He looked to the left and right, then chuckled softly as he said, "Audrey, I know a real Beyonder, a Beyonder that doesn't belong to the royal family. You've disappointed me every time you said that." Audrey looked forward and replied elegantly, "Really? I swear on my father's name. I have seen his Beyonder powers," Klein replied with whisper. Audrey was no longer the same as before, in which should be excited over the news. She was now a Beyonder, but to prevent Klein from turning suspicious, she widened her eyes and faked a surprised smile. She asked with her voice trembling, "When can I see him?" "Yes, it'd be great to meet other Beyonders. I can't just solve every triviality through the Tarot Club. Besides, I must gather my own resources to exchange them with Mr. Fool and Mr. Hanged Man. Not everything can be solved with money. Sigh, now that I've sent out the £1,000, I'll have to be more frugal." Klein was very satisfied with Audrey's response. He looked towards the racecourse and said, "Tomorrow afternoon, there will be a literature and music salon at my place. Inside Deweyville Library." Klein took out his identity card and badge from his pocket and showed them to the few librarians. "I am a probationary inspector from the Special Operations Department of the Awa County Police. I need your cooperation in an investigation," he said in a deep voice, recalling the police films that he used to watch. The librarians looked at the identity card and badge before exchanging looks and nodding at each other. "Go ahead and ask, officer." Klein recited the names of the journals like New Archaeology, and upon finishing, he said, "I want the borrowing records of the journal for the last 2 months." He realized that one of the librarians had attended to him before, but it was obvious that the man didn't recognize him. "All right. Hold on a second." The librarian started searching and quickly found the recent borrowing records. Klein flipped through the records seriously, looking for the man who had borrowed the same journal as he did. There weren't many names since there was only one. He had borrowed the journal several times, including the issue that Klein knew of. The earliest entry was at the end of May, and the most recent one was last Saturday, a day before Hannas Vincent's death. Klein ran his finger over the borrower's information and memorized it. Sirius Arapis, cloth merchant, residing at 19 House Street. Chapter 103, Doing as the Heart Willed. He resides at 19 House Street? Whilst memorizing the information, Klein keenly noticed a piece of information. Yes, Welch stayed on House Street. The Divination Club is on House Street. This cloth merchant named Sirius Arapis also lives on House Street. From the looks of it, it's nothing strange for Welch to know Hannas Vincent either. They might have even gotten to know each through Sirius Arapis. Suddenly, Klein felt that he had linked the clues together as his thoughts turned clear. He was originally confused as to how Welch would be acquainted with Hannas Vincent, since this son of a banker wasn't particularly interested in mysticism. To him, money was more important than divinations. But now, Klein felt that he had an inkling as to how they became acquainted. According to the descriptions of several magazines, middle-class and wealthy residents would gladly pay a visit to their neighbors from the same social class in order to form a social circle which is beneficial to them. Similarly, Welch and the cloth merchant, Sirius, absolutely have the motivation and opportunity to become friends since they both lived in the House Street vicinity. It isn't hard to understand how Sirius knew Hannas Vincent, who regularly went to the Divination Club on House Street. Perhaps it was a coincidental meeting, or perhaps Hannas had helped him out before. Regardless, this made it possible for the two of them, who frequently ran into each other within the same area, to become closer to one another. Hannas Vincent wanted to sell his ancient books, and thus, Sirius introduced him to Welch, who was an undergraduate of the history department. In Hannah's dream, there was the figure of the suspected evil god, the true creator. He also knew of the proper incantation format. This proves that he was very deep into the realm of mysticism. The possibility that he might have even been a member of some secret organization cannot be dismissed. I cannot rule out the possibility of him joining some secret organization under Sirius's influence. With ideas coming to him so easily, Klein could tell that the information the man had left behind had a certain level of credibility without even using divination methods. Even if he isn't called Sirius Arapis, nor work as a cloth merchant, and doesn't live at 19 House Street, he definitely resides at House Street or, at the very least, somewhere nearby. While these ideas ran through his mind, Klein viewed the borrowing records once again with this new train of thought. The last time he came to Deweyville Library was last Saturday, a day before Selena's birthday party, which was also a day before Honas Vincent died. Several days have already passed since then, but he hasn't returned the issues that he borrowed. According to past records, if he only borrowed 2 issues, he would usually return them the next day. Could this mean that he knows of Hannah's death and was scared to the point that he no longer dares to come to the Deweyville Library again? Yes, he started by borrowing several unrelated history books and journals until he narrowed down what he needed, which is very similar to what I had read. This means that there was no one teaching him. There was no senior associate professor from the history department of a university. He did this completely through trial and error. What would a shocked target do? 2 choices. 1. If he had all the necessary information, he would head straight to the main peak of the Hornaces mountain range. 2. If he still lacks information, he would lay low and observe the situation. He would only show himself again if he's certain that Hannah's death wouldn't implicate him. Having made this conclusion, Klein closed the borrowing records and returned them to the librarians. He then took out the portrait and asked if anyone had seen the man. Unfortunately, many people came to borrow books every day, and the librarians didn't have any impression of the average person. All right, thank you for your time. Klein put away his identification documents and his badge. He had no intention of continuing the investigation alone. This wasn't only dangerous, but also troublesome. He planned to head to Zutland Street once again and hand the case over to Captain and his teammates. He then planned to go home and prepare his tomato oxtail soup for his siblings before heading to the world above the gray fog to divine the target's whereabouts and condition. "Officer, is there anything else?" a librarian asked sincerely as he heaved a sigh of relief. Klein nodded slightly and asked, "No, I will come back if there are new clues." He held his black cane with his left hand and made his way to the door. At this moment, he saw a man enter the library with his head hung low. He was dressed in a double-breasted coat, its collar standing tall. When they walked past each other, Klein caught a glance of his thick, messy brows, and his pair of grayish-blue eyes. These were things the tall collar couldn't hide. Sirius? Sirius Arapis? A coincidence? Klein froze. He didn't expect to meet his target here. What kind of luck was this? Wasn't this too much of a coincidence? He evaluated his physical condition and felt his aching sore muscles. Thus, he acted as though nothing had happened and continued walking towards the door. Well, we have to follow what our heart tells us. Safety matters. It doesn't matter if I missed this opportunity as long as Sirius is still in Tingen. At this moment, the man in the double-breasted coat arrived before the counter and was handing the journals to one of the librarians. "It's a return," he said with a soft, muffled tone. The librarian received the journals causally, and when he saw it, he suddenly froze. He subconsciously looked up and differently as his body couldn't help but tremble. "Is there a problem?" the man asked in a deep voice. His question seemed like a spark that ignited a fuse, causing the librarian to instantly lose his self-control. He sprinted to the side and shouted, "Officer! The criminal is here." At this moment, Klein, who hadn't left the building, cursed madly in his heart. He instinctively reached for his holster with his right hand and drew his revolver. That man froze for a moment before turning and breaking into a sprint. But he didn't head for the door. Instead, he escaped in the direction of the oriel window to the side, as if he wanted to smash through the glass and jump out onto the street. Klein, who was flustered, turned his head to see the scene when he felt a sudden calm. He realized that even though he was afraid of the target, his target was more afraid of him. The man must be unable to determine my abilities in such an abrupt meeting. He isn't clear on what I am adept in, and so, he will instinctively avoid a direct confrontation and look for other ways to escape. Confident of his analysis, Klein lifted his revolver and pulled the trigger. At that moment, the man in the double-breasted coat abruptly rolled onto the ground in an attempt to avoid the bullet. Following up on that, he pressed down on the ground with his right hand and propelled himself into the air towards the oriel window. Click. Klein's first shot was empty. But this was something he had expected. He took advantage of Sirius's inability to dodge while in midair to aim at his torso and pulled the trigger. Bang! The silver demon hunting bullets tore through the air and penetrated straight through Sirius's back. Crash! The glass shattered and Sirius flew out the window, leaving drops of crimson blood on the crystalline glass fragments and windowsill. Klein was no longer afraid now that the target was injured. He ran over and jumped out the window with the help of a chair. This was the area lining the back of Deweyville Library's ground floor. A row of trees isolated a lush green field. The injured Sirius was running to the side, in an attempt to enter a small alley between two buildings. Having not practiced shooting at moving targets, Klein didn't dare to fire blindly. He could only carry his cane in one hand and his gun in the other as he pursued the man in a black coat. Tap. 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 He followed the trail of blood on the floor and tried to close the distance. With a corner coming up, the injured Sirius's speed became slower and slower. Klein, who had been waiting for an opportunity to capture him, suddenly felt a little afraid. He felt as though the man in front of him wasn't human, but a wolf or a tiger, one that harbored terrifying dangers. This was an instinct he had as a seer, and also a warning given to him by his spirituality. Klein immediately slowed down, his eyes scanning the blood on the ground. Compared to the blood he had seen earlier, Sirius's blood was now black. At this moment, a violent wind overwhelmed him. Sirius's face was reflected in Klein's eyes. Thick, messy brows. Grayish-blue eyes. Multiple protruding warts. An open mouth with 2 rows of white teeth. Sirius was launching a counterattack at this moment. This made the face reflected in Klein's eyes more visible. He could even smell a particularly putrid stench. Sirius pounced a distance of 7 or 8 meters, far more than any normal human being could jump. But as Klein had stopped chasing him just in time, there was still a distance of nearly 10 meters between them. When the distance was shortened to 2 meters, the sticky saliva caused by drool and the disgusting dense warts formed a harrowing scene that made Klein's nerves tense up. Without thinking, he seized the opportunity of the temporary immobility caused by Sirius's pounce to raise his right hand. He fired without stopping, allowing the bullets to rain down on the target's head. Bang! 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 Shooting from such a close distance allowed the silver demon hunting bullets to drill through Sirius's head. Blood splattered everywhere as his face became more and more mangled, until he staggered backwards. Klein had emptied the bullets in his revolver in an instant. He subconsciously wanted to take a few steps back in order to confirm the results of this battle. But at this moment, Sirius gave Klein the shock of his life by trying his hardest to stand up straight. Klein abruptly lifted the cane in his left hand. Smack! The sturdy silver-inlaid black cane struck Sirius's neck, leaving a dark red mark. Smack! 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 Klein acted on instinct, raining blows on his opponent until Sirius collapsed stumbling onto the ground. Huff! Puff! Huff! Klein supported himself with his cane and took deep breaths. His eyes were trained intently on his target, afraid that Sirius would suddenly jump back to life. At that moment, Sirius' head had basically been smashed into a pulp, and the warts gradually receded. His body stopped moving after a few convulsions. Klein was in no hurry to examine the corpse. Instead, he tossed his cane to the side and took out the demon-hunting bullets he had on him and reloaded his revolver. After doing this, he collected himself and fought back his disgust, kneeling down to search the pockets of Sirius's double-breasted coat. Chapter 104, Mr. Z1 Pocket, 2 pockets, 3 pockets. Klein soon found a blood-stained wallet, a Deweyville library card, 2 pairs of brass keys, an unstuffed smoking pipe, a sheathed dagger, and a few letters that were folded neatly. Laying everything onto the ground except for the letters, he stood up straight and looked at the wallet. He confirmed that there were only 10 plus soldi and some copper pennies. The craftsmanship of the wallet is quite exquisite. It's such a pity. Klein sighed, feeling a little distracted. If I didn't spend so much of my private stash of money, buying a wallet would have been on my schedule today. After shaking his head, Klein opened the letters and quickly scanned through them. Dear Mr. Z, please allow me to defend myself. When Hanas and I sold off the Antigonus family's notebook, it wasn't stupidity or betrayal. It didn't appear special in any way when it was in our hands. I suspect that it's alive and that it's a wicked item armed with a certain life and wisdom. It was something dangerous that needed to be sealed. At different stages and before different people, it shows different contents. This is a proven fact that I've learnt from the lamb in the police station. Although the notebook shows content that is sufficiently true each time with plenty of evidence, I believe that it would only reveal the completed content in the hands of a descendant of the Antigonus family. When Hanas and I received it, we could only see some trivial matters of the Antigonus family, the general situation of the nation of the Evernight on the main peak of the Hornacis mountain range, and also the 3 sequence potion formulas we handed in to you previously. As you know, the Secret Order has the seer pathway in its grasp and possesses powerful tracking abilities, so Hanas and I believed that it would be a risky move to continue keeping the notebook. The value it had presented to us wasn't sufficient for us to take the risk. Since we couldn't wait for your reply, we agreed amongst ourselves to sell the notebook to Welch, who was living on the same street. He enjoyed collecting relics and ancient books, and he could afford to pay a high price for it. As for the subsequent developments, you are already aware of it. This is the first thing that I'd like to explain. As I am writing these words, Hanas is dead. He died due to a heart attack during his sleep. That must be a blessing from God, to prevent him from suffering the outcome of falling into the hands of heretics. I had no choice but to move to somewhere safer, more hidden. I didn't even dare to leave the house. Luckily, the lamb told me that the reason Hanas was being eyed by the heretics wasn't because of the Antigonus family's notebook, nor was his identity exposed. It was just that he had taken in a silly female disciple in the hopes of slowly developing her into one of us. His female disciple had stolen a glance at his secret incantation and tried the magic divination while a Nighthawk heretic was watching. I believe you can pretty much guess the rest of the story, so there is no need for me to describe it. It's a pity that the position of the lamb isn't high enough, so the actual details cannot be determined. From various feedback, it seems the heretics have yet to suspect me. Their investigations came to a halt due to Hannah's sudden death. Therefore, I will return to the streets and plan to borrow a few more journal issues from the Deweyville library to seek out more clues. As a faction that also had the seer pathway in its grasp, the Antigonus family must have had some divinations regarding its decimation. They must have left behind secret treasures that would allow for the revival of the family. There's sufficient reason to believe that the treasure is hidden on the main peak of the Hornacis mountain range, which is in one of the relics in the nation of the Evernight. Having read that, Klein's pupils constricted rapidly. He nearly dropped the letter. The pathway that the Antigonus family had in its grasp was the seer pathway. What a coincidence. Thunder seemed to boom in Klein's head again and again that left him in a daze. He felt as though it was destiny. The notebook that led to the original Klein's death and indirectly helped me transmigrate, originated from the Antigonus family that has the seer pathway in its grasp. The one that eventually made me choose the seer potion was the Emperor Rosel's diary, while Emperor Rosel was biased towards the seer sequence because of the mysterious Mr. Zeradal who was the leader of the Secret Order, which also has the seer pathway in its grasp. This is like a suffocating net sewn by fate. What exactly is lurking behind all of this? Klein held the letter and paced back and forth. He needed to verify the contents with other sources. Yes, the secret order that the Zeradal family controls is pursuing and searching for the belongings left behind by the Antigonus family. If both parties shared the same Beyonder sequence, there would be a sufficient reason and motive. Perhaps it is to bridge any missing sequences, obtain rare ingredients for a higher sequence advancement, or covet the other party's accumulated experiences in avoiding the loss of control. Going by this line of thought, it is rather reasonable that the Antigonus family has at least part of the seer sequence chain. Yes, when I was divining for clues pertaining to the clown potion, the images that emerged were mostly related to the Antigonus family. The only exception was the suited clown from the secret order. Therefore, the true meaning behind the symbolism is that each scene carries the possibility of obtaining the clown potion and a clue. However, I didn't understand the crux of the issue and regrettably missed it. With the two corroborating evidence, Klein nearly believed the matters that Sirius had brought up in the letter. He also understood why he constantly heard the word hornasis in the murmurs he shouldn't be hearing. The earliest occurrence of this happening was when I first consumed the seer potion. He wore a serious expression as he thought to himself. Meanwhile, he guessed that being a survivor of those that made contact with a relic of the Antigonus family and becoming a Beyonder of the seer pathway were two necessary conditions to hear the murmurs saying hornasis. Is there really a secret treasure buried within the ancient ruins on the main peak of the Hornacis mountain range by the Antigonus family? No, I can't think about this. Just the notebook alone has killed so many people. Any complete treasure would be even more terrifying. Klein shook his head subconsciously and cast his gaze onto the third piece of paper, which was the last of the letters. Honorable Mr. Z, I hope I can gain your assistance. I believe that you should be sufficiently interested in the treasure too. Until then, I will make myself look like a normal person, a normal lover of history. When the end of days arrives, I will offer all of Tinjin's lambs as a sacrifice to God. Humbly, Sirius Arapes. When he finished reading Sirius's letter, Klein had the urge to laugh. Heh, why do I feel like I saved Tinjin? What was this guy trying to do? Heretics are truly unbelievable. Who is this Mr. Z? He seems like someone in a high position. At the very least, he should be at the same sequence as Captain. Where was Sirius sending the letter to? He didn't write down the address. It seems like that's the cautiousness of a heretic. They wouldn't put the address on until the moment before they sent it out. Right, if the Antigonus family had the potion of the seer pathway in its grasp, then would the clown potion be among the 3 formulas inside the Antigonus family's notebook that Sirius sent? Highly likely. In that instant, Klein seemed to have found clues to the clown potion. Although Sirius didn't bring the formula along with him, it was possible that he had left some form of record at his hideout. He must have also had it in his head, in his memories. Klein looked at the corpse before him and considered the problem of making a dead person speak. It required almost zero consideration, as an idea immediately popped into his head. Mediumship. Spirit mediums could directly communicate with spirits that had yet to disperse. Seers, mystery priors, and others could roughly accomplish the same thing using ritualistic magic. Previously, when he was dealing with the corpse of the suited clown, there were 3 things that had kept Klein from using mediumship. Firstly, he was in a hurry to save the rest. Secondly, he didn't have the ingredients with him, and lastly, he lacked confidence. Thus, he didn't consider the option of mediumship and missed his best chance. When they returned to Blackthorn Security Company, the spirit was mostly gone. Even a spirit medium could only get superficial information. But now, Klein happened to have all the ingredients and tools, and he happened to have the experience of communicating with lingering resentment through the help of dream divination. My only concern about contacting the spirit of a heretic would be being placed in the same situation as Captain's entry into Hannah's dream where he saw a horrifying existence. However, Captain only remained frail for 2 days, and he wasn't considered severely injured. Yes, I could give it a try. He hesitated for less than 20 seconds before making a decision. He didn't want to miss out on this opportunity. He raised his head, turned around, and cast his gaze toward the spot where the window had shattered. There was a crowd gathered there watching. He took out his identification card and badge before returning to the broken window. He then told the onlookers through the shattered oriel window, I am a probationary inspector from the Special Operations Department of the Awa County Police. I have shot the criminal to death. Please take this badge to the nearest police station and tell them to send backup to deal with the follow-up. The rest are to help me cordon off this area. Do not allow anyone to come close, for they might contaminate the scene. Yes, officer. The librarian that caused Klein the trouble quickly took the badge. When the entire scene was cordoned off and no one could enter the grass patch, Klein returned to the corner and stood by the side of the corpse. He was glad that the innocent crowd couldn't see the dead body, which looked more like a monster than a human. He put down his cane and revolver, then reached into the inner pocket of his windbreaker to take out a metal bottle. He was going to use the techniques of a mediumship ritual with dream divination to make the dead man speak. Chapter 105, Spirit Channeling. Klein twisted open the golden bottle's cap and brought it to his nose. He took a whiff of the stimulating scent that energized him. This was holy night powder made using slumber flowers, dragon blood grass, deep red sandalwood, mint, and other herbs. Since it was simple to concoct, Klein had made a batch the moment he got the ingredients from the underground market. It was going to be of use now. He poured a little of the holy night powder on his palm and collected himself. His irises turned dark. Next, Klein put away the metal bottle and scattered the powder onto the ground after infusing his spirituality into it. He scattered the powder as he walked, forming a circle around Sirius's corpse. A formless barrier rose, separating them from the outside world. Klein flicked away the remaining holy night powder on his hand and took out the other metal bottles. He sprinkled the Amantha Pure Dew and other liquids in the surrounding area. The ritual he set up was different from the one old Neil used at Ray Bieber's house, since the aim of the ritual was different. For example, old Neil poured the liquids before using the holy night powder. That could create a serene and holy state second only to an actual altar. Klein had used the holy night powder first before pouring the liquids to prevent Sirius's remnant spirituality from being disturbed by the surrounding objects, while still barely managing to have an environment that satisfied the requirements of the ritual. If he had used old Neil's method, the rest of Sirius's spirituality would have been purged, making it impossible to establish a connection. After finishing his preparations, Klein put away the materials and entered a state of cogitation. He recited the Hermes incantations softly. I pray for the power of the dark night. I pray for the power of the mystery. I pray for the goddess loving grace. I pray that you'll allow me to communicate with the heretic spirituality inside this altar. As the incantations reverberated throughout the sealed space, Klein suddenly felt a massive, terrifying, and mysterious energy descend upon him. His eyes turned completely black, as though he had lost his pupils and the whites of his eyes. Seizing the opportunity, Klein recited a divination statement in his heart, the formula to the clown potion. The formula to the clown potion. As he was reciting the statement, he used cogitation to temporarily enter a dreamlike state. It was a hazy gray world without a sky or ground. Klein was unusually alert as he observed a transparent, ethereal figure. He extended his right hand and touched the remnants of Sirius's spirit. The scene in front of him changed with a rumble. It was a study table painted with dark red paint. There were 3 candles on a silver candle stand, as well as a blank piece of paper. Sirius had a pen in his hand. He wrote in Lone language, "This is the second formula. Its name in the notebook is Clown. 80 milliliters of pure water, 5 drops of torn apple juice, 7 grams of black-rimmed sunflower powder, 10 grams of golden cloak grass powder, 3 drops of poison hemlock. These are the supplementary ingredients. The main supernatural ingredients are 1 crystal of the single horn of a matured Hornacis gray mountain goat and a complete stalk of a human-faced rose." Sirius seemed to have the clown potion's formula memorized as he quickly finished writing it. He paused for a moment and took a sip of coffee, then he unwound the silver pendulum around his wrist. He held the pendulum and closed his eyes, muttering terms to himself such as, the end of days, peace of mind, hope for the Lord's blessings, and confess. After Sirius finished his prayer, Klein finally saw the pendulum clearly. Under the wound's silver chain was a thumb-sized human figurine. The figurine had a single eye, a trait unique to giants. It was facing down, its legs bound by chains that connected upwards. At that moment, the single eye of the giant suddenly had a faint red glow. Crack! The scene Klein witnessed shattered as his legs buckled, almost causing him to kneel to the ground. Klein felt pain in his head as though he had been struck ruthlessly in the head with a bat. His vision turned blood-red as his hands involuntarily reached out to protect his knees. He recovered several seconds later and stood back up. He felt that his spirituality was unusually weak, as if he had heard the murmurings that penetrated his mind once again. But due to his progress in digesting the magic medicine, the adverse reaction calmed down quickly. The hanged giant, the true creator. Sirius and Hanas were both members of the Aurora Order. But the captain saw a huge cross in Hannah's dream. The terrifying being crucified on the cross wasn't the Aurora Order's hanged giant. Klein took 2 deep breaths and waited for his spirituality to slowly recover. The Aurora Order was a secret organization that sprang into existence about 200 to 300 years ago. They worshipped the true creator and symbolized him with the hanged giant. They believed that every human being had divine qualities, and as long as they persevered and made it through the countless trials, they would be able to accumulate enough divine qualities to become angels. According to the internal records of the Nighthawks, the sequence 9 of the Aurora Order was Secret Suppliant. These Beyonders could sense the existence of mysterious and horrifying beings and were armed with a decent amount of knowledge regarding sacrifices and some knowledge on ritualistic magic. There was enough evidence to claim that senior secret suppliants experienced distortions of their worldview and lost control easily. Little was known about the Sequence 7 which the Aurora Order had grasped. Sequence 8 was Listener. This was considered quite a terrifying job for a Beyonder. Every listener could listen directly to the whispers of the secret entities, thus, they frequently came into contact with powerful, distorted, unique abilities. But consequently, if they were unable to advance, it was difficult for them to survive the next 5 years after becoming a listener. Furthermore, the comments the Nighthawks had in the reports were that every listener was a lunatic. Even if they looked normal on the surface, they were always crazy on the inside. The details of the report regarding the Aurora Order flashed through Klein's mind. His initial theory was that Sirius was a secret suppliant. From the description, secret suppliant are as hopeless as seers in battle. That does fit Sirius's actions just now. What happened later was a loss of control brought about by the injury. Yes, Fry once said that every Beyonder would more or less undergo some weird changes after they die. Klein thought as he tapped 4 points on his chest to praise the goddess. After his spirituality recovered slightly, he concluded the ritual with the appropriate procedure and dismantled the wall of spirituality. With a whoosh, a gust of wind blew as Klein forced himself to look at Sirius's corpse. He noticed that there was still an obvious wart on Sirius's mangled face. It was a dark purple wart, almost black. There seemed to be liquid and a light gleaming within. What kind of transformation was that? Klein rubbed his temples, not daring to touch it. He bent over and retrieved his cane, allowing it to bear his weight. After what had just happened, he knew that Sirius's spirituality had been completely destroyed. Even the spirit medium Daly would be unable to communicate with him. After a while, Klein saw Captain Dunn and his partners, Leonard and Kenley. It seems like your fate is tied to Beyonders and evil forces. In just a few weeks, you have come across more supernatural incidents than what we usually see in months, Leonard joked, looking at the corpse on the ground. It might not be a coincidence, Klein added, as he suddenly thought about the red chimney he had seen in his dream divination, as well as the majestic palace on the main peak of the Hornacis mountain range and the formless focus on him. He took the opportunity to mention it in passing. Dunn surveyed the surroundings and, with his gray eyes trained on Klein, asked, "You tried channeling his spirit?" There were still traces of holy night powder and the scent of the essential oils. "Yes," Klein replied truthfully. "I was worried that you would arrive late and that the remains of his spirituality would scatter." "You don't look well." "Are you all right?" the short Kenley asked in concern. Klein passed Sirius's undelivered letter to the captain and began from the beginning. When I went to the underground market to purchase materials for the rituals, I suddenly remembered that Selena had also once gone to the Evil Dragon bar and that it was Honass Vincent that brought her there. This meant that Honass was a regular there. Thus, I suspected that the person in the portrait, someone who's definitely connected to Honass, might have gone to the underground market too. I asked the boss Swain about the portrait, and he gave me confirmation. He told me that the man had once tried to buy documents and items related to the Hornaces Mountains. That reminded me of the library. I recalled that the librarian had mentioned that someone had just returned the journal issue I wanted to borrow. Leonard stood to the side, listening with a smile. He suddenly interrupted, "And so you brought your identification documents and badge here to flip through the borrowing records? Actually, I am very curious. Why would you come into conflict with this man here? Even if it was a direct encounter, with your style of doing things, you would have pretended that you didn't know him and would just leave the library. Then you would come to Zutland Street to ask for our help. Yes, there was no need for you to take the risk. As long as you confirm the target and that he hasn't left Tingen, there would always be a way to find him," Dunn added as he reviewed the letter. Klein immediately said in embarrassment. The librarian recognized him and shouted for the police to help. There's no way I could have pretended not to hear that. Leonard and Kenley looked at each other. One tried to cover his amusement, while the other turned his head to the side. Dunn nodded, his gaze leaving the letters. "Did you get anything from channeling his spirit?" "I saw a pendulum that took the shape of a hanged giant. I saw a blood-red glow flash in the giant's only eye before I was forced out of the ritual," Klein described honestly. He didn't want to talk about the clown potion for the time being as he had two considerations. First, if Dunn and the rest were able to find Sirius's hideout and the corresponding records, then it would make no difference if he told them or not, as there would be no additional contributions attributed to him. Second, if Dunn and the rest were unable to find it, he could report it in the future. This way, he would be awarded with another contribution, allowing him to acquire the ingredients needed to concoct a potion. This was a way to obtain double the rewards for a single task, a technique that stemmed from old Neil's recent teachings. "Aurora Order?" Dunn muttered to himself before he asked some relevant questions. After Klein answered all his questions, he saw the fatigue in Klein's eyes and waved his cane. "Not bad. You foiled a scheme that was targeting Tingen. You can go back and rest. Kenley, bring old Neil over." After giving out instructions, Dunn smiled bitterly and shook his head. Before Sequence 6, Beyonders of the Sleepless Pathway lack many supplemental abilities. We can only conduct the simplest of ritualistic magic. "Captain, you mean that from Sequence 6 onwards, a Sleepless Pathway Beyonder would gain improvements in the corresponding aspects?" Klein asked out of curiosity. "Yes," Dunn confirmed. After leaving the Daffodil Street Library, Klein nearly fell asleep in the carriage on multiple occasions on his way back to Daffodil Street. He lumbered into the house, he then removed his hat and jacket before falling asleep on the sofa. Sometime later, he woke up abruptly, took out his pocket watch, and snapped it open. "Melissa will be back in half an hour, Benson in 45 minutes. If I don't get up, I'll have to make them wait an hour before we can have dinner." Klein rubbed his forehead as he entered the kitchen. He washed his face with cold water, then took out the oxtail, tomatoes, carrots, and onions he had bought that afternoon. After he prepared the ingredients, he suddenly froze. He had the feeling that his actions just now formed a strange juxtaposition with the incident that afternoon. "I am a man who just saved Tingen," Klein mumbled in amusement. He put on a white apron and got to making dinner. Chapter 106, Artist Klein after 8 in the evening, in the Moretti family's dining room. As he looked at the shallow soup left in the bowl, Benson raised his hand to cover his mouth to give a satisfied burp. "Although that was our third time eating it, I still find it delicious. The sourness and sweetness of the tomato and the chewy texture of the oxtail blends into a perfect and unique flavor. Klein, I'm sorry that the Blackthorn Security Company caused Tingen City to lose such an outstanding chef." Melissa leaned backwards in her chair and nodded in agreement silently. This is because you have yet to try real cooking. Klein smiled humbly. If we have a chance in the future, let's head to Bonaparte Restaurant on House Street for some authentic Indus cuisine, and also to Coastline Restaurant in the Golden Indus Borough for some southern delicacies. These were restaurants that were always covered in the newspapers, where the average cost per person was around £1.50. I like your cooking more, Melissa answered without hesitation. Benson chuckled and changed the topic. But I ultimately feel that there's something lacking from the tomato oxtail soup. Perhaps it shouldn't be eaten with bread? Klein nodded in agreement. It's best complemented with rice. Rice, Melissa muttered with an expression of yearning. Tianjin, which was located north, wasn't considered a big city. Besides a few particular restaurants, it was difficult to have any chance of eating rice. To Benson and Melissa, this kind of food only existed in the descriptions of newspapers and textbooks. Looking at his sister's expression, Klein laughed. Wait till we save another 6 months' salary, and we will find a chance to go on vacation in Daly Bay and try the delicacies there. Daly Bay was located in the far south of the Lone Kingdom, and a third of it belonged to Fenapotter Kingdom. It had plenty of sunlight and beautiful scenery, and the paella there was very famous. Before Melissa could share her opinion on saving money, Klein said, in another 3 months, I should get another raise. By then, we could totally fulfill our desire to travel as well as save money for necessities. Why? Benson and Melissa's attention was redirected as expected. Klein coughed lightly and smiled while explaining, due to my professionalism, the police department, which always collaborates with our company, intends to hire me as their part-time history consultant. They would pay me extra, at least £2 a week. If you see me in a police uniform in the future showing the corresponding police documentation, please don't be shocked. Of course, as you know, the work efficiency in governmental departments is as slow as a 90-year-old lady's footsteps. They still have to go through a lengthy procedure, and they're required to do a thorough inspection of me. Hence, on my off days for the next 2 months, I'll be heading to Koei University quite often to see my mentor and the teaching staff I know to learn more. Seeing the shocked look in his brother and sister's eyes, he paused and said with a strange expression, just like Emperor Roselle said, one is never too old to learn. Benson maintained a few seconds of silence before saying in a half self-deprecating and half emotional manner, is it too late for me to sign up for university? Knowledge really is wealth. And also power. Klein added silently. Benson, you need Klein's grammar books and his classic literature textbooks, Melissa said out of the blue, stealing the words from Klein's mouth. Benson's expression seemed to change. He gritted his teeth and said, Klein, pass me those books tonight. Even if all they do is put me to sleep, I am determined to read them for an hour, no, an hour and a half a day. I swear in the name of the goddess. If I can't do it, I will be a curly-haired baboon. A smile immediately plastered across Klein's face. No problem. The next morning, Klein hung his coat and hat on the clothes rack in the break room. Then he followed Roseanne's instructions and walked to the basement to the duty room outside Cheney's gate. Captain Dunn and members Fry, Sika, Royale, Leonard, and Kenley were all there. As his gray eyes glanced past the newly promoted Nighthawk, Dunn smiled and said, We have a routine meeting every Thursday to summarize past missions and discuss various challenges. I am a man who has endured the test of many regular meetings as well. Klein lampooned. He found a seat and joked, Do I need to introduce myself? Dunn smiled and turned to look at Kenley. Briefly tell us about the investigation of serious Arapis. Kenley was also a Nighthawk who had been promoted from a member of the civilian staff. He wasn't very tall, his brown hair was quite thick, his body size was average, his muscles were very toned, and he looked like someone who was smart and capable. He thought and said, with old Neil's help, we found Sirius's secret hideout. There were many books and items at the scene. From them, we can be certain that Sirius was one of the underground members of the secret organization, the Aurora Order. He was also a secret suppliant. There's sufficient evidence to show that he and Honas Vincent sold the Antigonus family notebook to Welch. Those who don't remember Welch can ask Klein about him. We found valuable items, including 3 sequence potion formulas, which are Sequence 9 Seer, Sequence 8 Apprentice, and Sequence 8 Clown. The subsequent task is to use Sirius's social circle and the letters we found to locate other outer circle members of the Aurora Order. The focus of our search will be directed at the heretic who has infiltrated the police department. Also, people who were in contact with Hanas need to be re-investigated. Dunn nodded lightly and looked towards Klein. As you heard just now, we've obtained the clown potion formula, but are unable to determine if it's real. We have to wait for the Holy Cathedral to give us feedback. In the mission relating to the Aurora Order, you have made a crucial contribution. Plus, given that you shot a member of the Secret Order, it won't be long until you accrue enough contributions to be promoted. But, I have to remind you that not everyone is like Daly. You have to suppress your desire and wait for 3 years. In order to avoid losing control, you can't allow your mindset to be affected by our discovery of the clown potion formula. Captain, you don't understand how magical it is to act. I have already confirmed the authenticity of the clown potion formula using divination above the gray fog last night. Klein nodded obediently. I will keep my emotions in check. Then Sikatron, the quiet midnight poet with white hair and black eyes, said, we still haven't found any clues regarding instigator Triss. I suspect that he has already fled from Tingen. After they were done exchanging their new information, Klein left the duty room and found old Neil to continue his mysticism lessons. In the afternoon, he went over to his combat teacher, Gawain, to do basic strength, endurance, and overall coordination training. With the sun still up and bright at 5. Klein took off his training costume, took a quick shower, and changed into his original clothing. He then took the public carriage to Bisic Street. He hadn't forgotten about the red chimney that he had seen in his dream divination, nor did he forget about the man that he suspected to be a member of the psychology alchemists who had bought supplementary ingredients for the spectator potion in the underground market. These things would be inconvenient to investigate in his role as a Nighthawk. Number 27. Henry's Private Detective Company. Yup, it's here. Klein found a private detective company according to the newspaper's descriptions. It was said to be trustworthy. He put on a mask, lowered his top hat, and flipped up his collar. He walked up the stairs and came to the company on the 2nd floor. Knock. 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 He knocked on the door that was half closed. Please come in, said a voice that seemed to be affected by phlegm. Klein lifted his cane and pushed the door to enter. He saw the detective company using an almost open layout. There were 4 employees sitting at their respective seats partitioned into small cubicles. Hi, I'm Detective Henry. How may I help you? A man in a white shirt and black vest greeted him. He held a smoking pipe in his hand, and he had a prominent jawline, blade-like eyebrows, and dark blue eyes that sized up his client. Klein used the collar of his windbreaker to block half of his face as he spoke. I have 2 matters to entrust to you. How are your rates? That depends on the difficulty of the task. Detective Henry retracted his gaze and pointed towards the sofa in the guest area. Let's talk over there. Klein followed him to the semi-partitioned area and sat on the single-seat sofa. He didn't take off his coat, nor did he take off his hat and mask. He purposely made his voice hoarse and said, First, I need you to help me find a house with a chimney that looks like this, as well as information on who the owner and current tenant are. As he spoke, he took out a neatly folded paper. When he opened it, there was a chimney with its color noted down and its surrounding scenery. This was the drawing that Klein completed by using the uniqueness of the area above the gray fog and the method of praying to himself. What a great drawing, Detective Henry complimented subconsciously. He then knitted his eyebrows and said, This is not complicated but very tedious. It would require a long time and a large amount of manpower. I understand. Klein nodded lightly. Detective Henry pondered for a moment and said, £7. The price for this job would be £7. In addition, you have to give me at least 2 weeks. All right. Second, help me find this gentleman and find out his identity. The only thing I know is that he occasionally appears at the Evil Dragon Bar near the harbor borough. And he must not detect any men you send. He is very sensitive and he has terrifying observational skills. Klein took out the second portrait. He intended to get in touch with a member of the psychology alchemists to see if he could find any valuable information and materials. For example, perhaps a formula that could be exchanged with justice? £3, such a mission would cost about £3 or £4. Your outstanding drawing skills will help my assistant and I save time, Detective Henry replied skillfully. £10 in total? Klein found the price upsetting. Detective Henry took a puff on his pipe and said, yes, and you need to put a deposit of £2. When there's progress, you'll need to pay another £3 to £5. The rest of the payment can be made when the mission is completed. Then I shall come next week to check on your progress. Klein didn't haggle over the price to prevent the observant detective from remembering any of his characteristics. After they signed a standard contract, he took out 2 £1 notes and passed them to the detective. He only had £1.17 solely left from his savings. As Detective Henry watched the man wearing a gauze mask and a black windbreaker with its collar raised leave in a hurry, he had a suspicious look in his eyes as he smoked his pipe. Why is he looking for a house that has that kind of chimney? He must be an artist, or at least a professional sketch artist of some sort. In the afternoon, in Viscount Glaine's luxurious mansion, Audrey, with her maidservant in tow, followed etiquette and passed her hand to the host. She looked at him, giving her hand a quick peck. Your beauty accentuates my salon, Glaine first gave a compliment as usual. Then, he lowered his voice and said, that lady is already here. She's a beyonder and also an author. Chapter 107, Furs, Author? Audrey asked casually as she observed Glaine's reaction. Subsequently, she didn't have to mind the presence of her maidservant, Annie, since they chatted about ordinary topics. Glaine straightened his body and chuckled. Yes, I believe that you have read her works in the past. She wrote the book, Stormwind Mountain Villa, which was highly acclaimed for the past 2 months. I enjoyed that book, especially The Calm Lady Sisai, Audrey replied with a faint smile. Meanwhile, she was rolling her eyes at her own hypocrisy inwardly. That was because her latest hobby had nothing to do with novels. She had stopped reading Stormwind Mountain Villa a month ago. Her progress stopped at the 1/3 mark. Ever since she joined the Tarot Club and acquainted herself with the powerful Fool, and became a real beyonder, she had been immersing herself in mysticism knowledge. She had been systematically learning about psychology and had lost interest in other activities. Smiling, Glaine guided Audrey to a sofa in the hall. I am sure that Miss Fur's wall will leave a good impression on you, for she is just like Stormwind Mountain Villa's Lady Sisai, calm, intellectual, and lazy. Also, my dear Miss Audrey, are you going to play the piano for us later? That is the greatest compliment for a novel and literature. Audrey looked at the side profile of Glaine's face. His expression, tone, and body language all conveyed his intention to flaunt himself. He wants to use me to show off. Audrey thought to herself, as if she had just met this good friend of hers for the first time. She maintained her elegant smile and said, my music teacher, Mr. Vicanel the pianist, said that my standards have deteriorated recently and needs more practice. All right. Glaine was just about wondering what to say when he suddenly saw a lady taking desserts from the long table. Audrey, this is Miss Fur's wall, the author of Stormwind Mountain Villa. Audrey looked over. Miss Fur's wall was about 23 years old and 165 meters in height. She was wearing a pale yellow dress with frills. Her brown hair was slightly curly. She looked over with her pale blue eyes as Glaine introduced her while wearing a smile that appeared ruminative. Audrey had noticed several small details in the less than 3 seconds of observation. There are faint traces of yellow on Miss Fur's fingers. She likes cigarettes. There are obvious calluses on her fingers at spots used to hold a pen, fitting her identity as an author. Her arm movements show that she has decent strength. This is not a quality expected of an author, unless she is passionate about exercising. Perhaps she was born like this, or she might have engaged in some other occupation in the past. She displayed her calm, rational, and precise style in Stormwind Mountain Villa. This must be linked to her previous occupation. Her eyes and emotions are relaxed, giving me the feeling that she is looking down on me and Glaint. Is this the psychological superiority a Beyonder has over an ordinary human? If it was a coincidence that Glaint discovered her identity as a Beyonder, then she should feel some anxiety and uneasiness. After all, she is unable to guess his reaction and what he would do next, since the unknown always brings about fear. This indicates that she was the one who voluntarily approached Glaint, having learned about our hobbies. She must be quite confident about what is going to happen next. Why would a Beyonder approach Glaint? Does she need monetary support, or the Beyonder ingredients stored in the treasury? Or perhaps she needs help with something. At this moment, Glaint was introducing Audrey to Furs. "Madam, this is the Miss Audrey that I mentioned previously, the most sparkling gem in all of Backlund. Her father is Count Hall, a trusted aide of His Majesty and respected member of the cabinet. Good afternoon, Madam Furs. Stormwind Mountain Villa is still seated by my bed to this very day." Audrey adhered to the rules of the aristocracy and curtsied. But she added silently, "That's because I haven't finished reading it even after a month." Furs returned the niceties simply and said, "Good afternoon, Miss Audrey. Your beauty sure leaves an impression. I think that I already have an idea for my next novel." Viscount Glaint said that you have exceptional talents in music." They merely exchanged praises as they were in public. After watching Furs continue towards the dining table as she targeted a cream cake, Audrey retracted her gaze and headed to the living room with Glaint. She recalled the details she had seen just now and tried to figure the motives of the woman. She wanted to gain some advantage in future conversations. As she took a step forward, Audrey, who was as calm as an objective spectator, stepped on her dress and nearly fell. At this moment, her personal maidservant, Annie, caught her, allowing her to maintain her grace. "Miss, the unique design of this dress means that you cannot walk too quickly," Annie pulled close to Audrey's ear and reminded her softly. "I know." Audrey nodded in reply, her face flushed red. "I was too absorbed in observing others that I forgot to look at where I was placing my foot," she silently complained in resentment. Audrey met with many other esteemed authors, critics, and musicians for the rest of the salon, always maintaining her sweet, elegant smile. Finally, after her facial muscles began turning sore, she saw Viscount Glaint's signal. She waited for a few minutes and gave the excuse of needing to use the washroom. She lifted her dress and stood up slowly to leave the salon. After confirming that there was no one tailing her, she made her way to the study on the first level and told her maidservant Annie, "I have something to discuss with Glaint. Guard the door for me. Do not let anyone enter." "All right." Annie didn't feel that the request was strange, for she knew that Audrey and Viscount Glaint shared similar hobbies and would often discuss mysticism in a private setting. Audrey entered the study and locked the door. She saw Glaint seated behind the desk while playing with a pen. Furs Wall was standing in front of the bookshelf, nonchalantly flipping through a book. "I'll introduce you both again. Madame Furs, a true Beyonder." Glaint put down his pen and walked over. "Is that so?" Audrey intentionally exaggerated her feelings of doubt. Furs returned the book to its original position and turned around with a smile. "It looks like I have to prove myself." She walked over to the door and extended her right palm, grabbing the handle of the door. Suddenly, Audrey's vision blurred. It was as if she witnessed Madame Furs turn incorporeal as she passed through the door. She was shocked. Concentrating, she realized that Furs was no longer standing in her original position. A few seconds later, the door handle turned. The locked door was opened just like that. Furs Wall smiled as she walked in from the outside. Audrey's maid, Annie, who was not far away, didn't seem to be aware of what had happened. "What a magical ability!" Glaint exclaimed. Audrey took in a deep breath and said, "I have no more doubts." At the same time, the ability Furs had displayed allowed Audrey to confirm what her true motives were. since acquiring money or materials would be no trouble for a Beyonder like that. Klein doesn't have any Beyonder guards. Furs wants to use the statuses and resources available to Klein and I to achieve something. Audrey tried her hardest to act as a spectator. Furs chortled and said, "Let us interact with honesty. We do not have much time left. I was once a doctor at a clinic and was given an opportunity to become a Beyonder. That was more than 2 years ago. I hope that you can do something for me, and the reward I will give you is allow you to join the ranks of true Beyonders. I will sell you the formula of a particular sequence potion and its corresponding materials." Upon hearing such a promise, Klein could not help but ask, "What do you want us to do?" "I have a partner who's in jail now, awaiting the final verdict. I hope that you can save her, regardless of the methods used," Furs said simply. Audrey frowned. "Madam Furs, the abilities you have demonstrated should be better suited for the task." Furs laughed and shook her head. "No, that is not the case. She cannot pass through the places that I can. I can only go in regularly and chat with her. Also, I think that risking my life to save her is not a good idea. Life is short, but there is much for us to do." Audrey observed Furs's face and body language. She considered her words before asking, "I understand. What crime is your partner being locked up for?" Furs's expression immediately turned a little awkward. "My partner is a very respected person who can make others comply from the bottom of their hearts. She is of good character and kind." "Well. It was that the means she used to convince a thug was a little over the top." After handing out the mission, Klein followed his original schedule of mysticism lessons in the morning and combat lessons in the afternoon. The regularity of his life almost made him forget that he was a member of the Nighthawks. The curse of often encountering supernatural incidents seemed to disappear as well. It was Saturday, his turn to guard Chimney's gate. "You can enjoy the coffee I left here or the black tea in the clerk's office." Dunn surveyed the room with his deep gray eyes. Klein, who had already given an excuse to his siblings, nodded in joy. "All right, Captain. You sure are a generous gentleman." Dunn laughed. "Those will help you relax. Being tense all the time is not good for your health." He took his hat and cane and walked toward the door. As he was exiting the door, he suddenly turned around and said, "I forgot to remind you, do not open Chimney's gate no matter what you hear, unless it is open from the inside. Remember, no matter what you hear, no matter what happens." "Captain, that's a little scary." Klein tensed up instantly. He felt the darkness of the basement triumph over the light of the gas lamp. Chapter 108. Deep into the night. Despite not being dawn yet, the well-ventilated but quiet and dark underground was illuminated by gas lamps. The dim yellow light emitted from the gas lamps were protected by glass, allowing them to steadily shine throughout the empty and quiet tunnel. Klein sat in the duty room and casually flipped through the newspapers, magazines, and books piled before him. He directed some of his attention outside, to prevent anyone from charging inside the Chimney's gate. His windbreaker and top hat were hung on the clothes rack near the entrance while his cane was leaning against the wall where it could be easily retrieved. The rich aroma of coffee filled the air, and Klein couldn't help but take a whiff. He massaged his temples to fight against the heavy head feeling he was experiencing and the weariness of his body. As a college student back on Earth, he often slept at 5 in the morning and woke up at noon, while staying up all night during the past 2 to 3 years of working life, to the point of being able to attend work energetically the next day. However, it was all thanks to the games that were too exhilarating, novels that were too interesting, television shows and movies that were too entertaining. This world obviously didn't possess any of the necessities needed for staying up all night. Seriously, Emperor Roselle. If you want to posture, do it properly. Pour your limited life into an unlimited enterprise. Lead the people of this world into the information age. Klein muttered silently. He could only console himself that there were at least newspapers, magazines, and increasingly interesting novels. At first, he wanted to focus on his studies to restrain his sleepiness. However, practically speaking, it conflicted with his duty. Once he entered that state, he would easily overlook any movements outside and any changes to the situation at the Chinese gate. Phew. Klein picked up his coffee cup and carefully blew at it. He took a sip and let the fragrant taste swish around his mouth before letting the liquid slowly flow down his throat. Fermo coffee from the Paws Valley, very bitter but very refreshing. Klein gave a compliment and put down his coffee cup. The Paws Valley was located in the southern continent, a region that produced high-quality coffee beans. It was currently being fought over by the Intis Republic and the Lone Kingdom. They both built colonist settlements on the left and right banks of the Paws Valley, and had destroyed the original Paws Kingdom. In the eerie silence, Klein casually picked up a magazine and realized that it was Ladies' Aesthetic, which talked about fashion and dating. This must be from Roseanne, he murmured in amusement as he flipped through it with his interest piqued. Maybe it was due to the sudden advancement of camera technology in the past decade or so. Not only did the magazine use a lot of illustrations, it even used monochrome pictures as their content, just like the newspapers. They fashionably invited the famous play and musical actors to model the charms and the magical pairing of the clothing. In a short span of 7 years, the new regional Backlund magazine became a mainstream magazine that spread across the nation. The dress looks nice, she's pretty too. Klein flipped through it casually and didn't hide his aesthetic inclinations. He was a man that had matured normally both in body and mind. He had always appreciated beautiful ladies, but he had long set his goal, to find a way home. Hence, he tried his best to keep his distance from the opposite sex, so that he didn't waste the other person's time or leave behind any emotional baggage. As for streetwalkers, he was quite a germaphobe in that aspect. Benson and Melissa were already shackles that couldn't be removed. He could only find the means to make it up to them in the future. Klein suddenly felt his heart heavy and he couldn't help but let out a sigh. The further he strayed away from home, the more he felt melancholic during quiet late nights. He suddenly lost his interest in looking at beautiful women and put down the magazine in his hands. He picked up a novel instead. Stormwind Mountain Villa, author, Furs Wall. Klein read the content on the cover. The tranquil night, dim yellow light, and the leather-bound book reminded him of his younger days when he rented books. Hence, he continued to read simply because of nostalgia. Stormwind Mountain Villa was a novel about Lady Sisai, who was 1.65 meters tall and weighed 98 pounds. It was a story of her embarking as a home tutor in the Fruis Mountain Villa. 1 pound is about half a kilogram. Is this Jane Eyre of an alternate world? Klein caressed his fingers against the smooth paper as he began making guesses of the subsequent content. However, just as he thought it was a romance novel, an evil spirit emerged in the story. When he believed that it was a ghost story, Lady Sisai revealed herself as a detective and made a marvelous deduction. Just as Klein felt that it was definitely a detective novel, the main male character took a heavy blow to the head and lost his memory. Then, it became a heart-rending drama. In the end, it's still a romance book. Klein closed the book and drank a mouthful of coffee. Thump. 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 A ferocious knocking was suddenly heard as it reverberated in the dim and quiet empty corridor. Klein jumped in shock as he immediately turned tense. He instinctively drew his revolver from his armpit holster, adjusted the cylinder and hammer. Then, he slowly walked to the door and looked for the source of the sound. Thump. 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 Bang. 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 The thumping became more and more intense. Klein looked in the direction of the sound and saw the black outward swinging gates that were engraved with 7 sacred emblems. Sounds from beyond the Chinese gate? He squinted his eyes and his heart was beating like a drum. Bang. 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 Klein saw Chinese gate shake gently, and he sensed the massive impact it was withstanding. It can't be, right? I'm encountering something on my first day on duty? Did I get an unlucky constitution after I transmigrated? Klein's right hand broke into cold sweat as it held the revolver. Very soon, he recalled the captain's instruction, do not open Chinese gate no matter what you hear, unless it is open from the inside. Could this be a normal phenomenon? Klein suddenly calmed down. Bang! 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 Thump! 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 The commotion beyond the Chinese gate grew in intensity, but the heavy black metal gates only shook. Otherwise, it didn't show any unusual signs. This is normal. I nearly died from the shock, Klein muttered, before he prepared to return to the duty room. Just then, he heard a sharp grinding noise. He looked at the heavy Chinese gate bulging outwards as a crack appeared in its surface. Zing! In the jarring noise, Klein's almost fixed eyes saw a figure. Its height was about the length of a man's arm, and it was wearing a classic, black, miniaturized regal gown. There was an obvious stain on the gown. It had a not-so-exquisite face, black eyes, and tightly sealed lips. It was a cloth puppet, a toy cloth puppet. At that moment, when Klein was about to subconsciously raise his gun to take aim, the cloth puppet leaned heavily into the crack in Chinese gate and unfurled the paper it was holding. There were many mysterious symbols on the paper, some that Klein knew and some that he had yet to learn. Together, they formed a vertical eye. Klein had yet to understand the situation when the regal gown puppet was suddenly dragged back by a shapeless force to the back of Chinese gate. Creak. Chinese gate closed once again, with no more knocking or pounding sounds. The basement regained its tranquility and silence as though nothing had happened. I have to inform Captain that Chinese gate was open from the inside. But it closed itself. At that moment, Klein's mental faculties returned to him as he felt alarm, fear, and doubt. A few seconds later, he recalled what the cloth puppet was. Since he was an official member of the Nighthawks, he was given the clearance to know about the Grade 3 sealed artifact sealed behind Chinese gate. Number, 0625. Name, Misfortune Cloth Puppet. Danger Grade, 3, considerably dangerous. It has to be used carefully. It can only be applied for operations that require 3 or more people. Security classification, official Nighthawk member or above. Sealing method, only needs to be separated from humans. Description: the cloth puppet is wearing a regal gown which was popular in around the year 1300. The gown has a stain that is almost impossible to remove. It is uncertain if the stain was present from the very beginning. In a few tragic cases of individual family financial crises recorded in Tianjin, the police noticed the existence of the puppet. It was always placed in the children's bedroom, on the side table next to the bed. A few Nighthawks accepted the request and started an investigation on the puppet. The initial evaluation determined that it brought misfortune, causing people around it to be unlucky and find themselves in danger. Finally, they would die one after another. It only took 2 weeks for the tester to reach the brink of bankruptcy. The puppet isn't equipped with the capability to live. It doesn't have any inclinations of escaping the seal. Through extended periods of experimentation, we discovered that as long as one does not come within 10 meters of it for more than half an hour a day, one wouldn't be tainted with misfortune. If misfortune has befallen someone, the person will immediately have his situation turn for the better as long as the misfortune is transferred to another person. Appendix: the puppet first appeared in the house of an old lady, Tess, who lived in the lower street of Iron Cross Street. She was a toymaker. Due to old age and her husband's severe illness, with both her children passing on early, she had no choice but to move to the Iron Cross Street's lower street. This was the last toy she sold. She exchanged the puppet for some poison hemlock and ended her and her husband's lives, having starved for more than 3 days. As Klein recalled the information of sealed artifact 3-0625, he felt even more doubtful and horrified. Didn't it say the puppet isn't equipped with the capability to live? Didn't it say that it doesn't have any inclinations of escaping the seal? What did I see just now? What dragged it back in the end? The symbol that was drawn on the paper that it unfurled, what does it mean? That scene earlier was like how a psychotic murderer deals with his victim as the victim slams on the gates heavily and cries for help desperately, only to be dragged back. While these thoughts flooded him, Klein decided not to make any decision on his own. He returned to the duty room and pulled a rope. The rope tightened, the gear spun, and there was suddenly a hurried ringtone that rang on the second floor of the Blackthorn Security Company. Leonard Mitchell and the other sleepless who were playing cards in the entertainment room immediately put down their poker cards and ran to the basement. You're tuning in to the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.